Give a few seconds, everybody, a chance to grab their chair. All right, good morning, everybody. Meeting will come to order. I note that a quorum is present, and each member has before them copies of the material on our agenda today as their place at their place on the rostrum. Today, the committee will consider 5 bills, all of which have been identified in consultation with the ranking member that address a wide range of issues within the committee's jurisdiction, streaming the delivery of disaster assistance, improving forest management opportunities through partnerships with tribes and local governments, expanding opportunities in agricultural research and innovation through precision agriculture, and even recognizing the APHIS Beagle brigade. Now, while we're certainly covering a breadth of issues, there's commonality among each of the bills before us today. They are all bipartisan, and I'm happy to support each of them. I'll be offering substitute amendments for 2 of the bills in order to address changes that have been adopted in other markups or to make adjustments to comply with floor protocols. And we'll give more detail when those bills are brought up for consideration. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for any opening remarks that he may have.
And thank you, our distinguished chairman. I really appreciate, Chairman, you bringing these important bills before the committee. And I want to recognize and say how much I appreciate the talent and the work on both sides of the aisle, and that they have really put their energies into these great bills, and our committee staff are doing a wonderful job with assisting our members on these bills. From helping our producers, conserving our forests and farms, protecting American agriculture from pests and disease to research, the Agriculture Committee touches every American. These bills are being considered today because our diverse and very talented Agriculture Committee members have great ideas. And I want to again thank them. I want to thank their staffs who are working so hard for their individual constituents. And I applaud them for rolling up their sleeves to get the job done, do good work on solving problems that affect our agriculture industry, and improving the programs that our constituents rely on. Mr. Chairman, I want to also thank you and your staff as well, and my own staff for their work on these bills. They're all bipartisan, and what a great meeting we're going to have today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman. The first bill for consideration is H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023. The bill, H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023, is now before the committee for consideration. Without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived and will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities, Risk Management, and Credit is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 662. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Thompson and my colleagues, for considering H.R. 662, the Block Grant Assistance Act of 2023, in today's markup. This bill, led by my colleagues, Representatives Scott Franklin and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has the support of the entire Florida delegation and is urgently needed by citrus producers in our state. After all, what is Florida if not citrus, right? Hurricane Ian impacted more than 375,000 acres of citrus groves, costing nearly $675 million in damages to the industry. In December of last year, Congress appropriated $3.7 billion to address agricultural losses from hurricanes and other natural disasters. However, to date, no citrus grower has received any of the agricultural disaster relief funds. Let me repeat that. No citrus grower has received any of the relief funds. This bill would allow the Secretary of Agriculture to create a program within USDA to support specialty crops, including citrus, damaged by natural disasters. In 2017, this relief model was successfully used to help growers recover from Hurricane Irma. The Block Grant Assistance Act would provide the same flexibility to the Secretary to help Florida citrus growers recover now from Hurricane Ian. Citrus is a crucial part of Florida's economy, with industry having more than 400,000 acres of citrus groves across the state. The industry contributes $6.8 billion to the economy every year and supports almost 35,000 jobs. Citrus growers have had no shortage of challenges over the past 2 decades, from citrus greening to natural disasters and labor concerns, but our state's producers have remained resilient. This bill would help our growers recover from Hurricane Ian by allowing the Secretary to efficiently deploy the funds that have already been appropriated by Congress. I want to thank again Chairman Thompson for considering this bill today, and I encourage all of my colleagues to support this measure. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Do any other members seek recognition for discussion on this bill? The gentleman from Florida is recognized. Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, natural disasters are inevitable, especially in places like Florida. And so the question becomes, how do we best help our farmers and growers recover? We saw Hurricane Ian hit our district, much like we saw Hurricane Irma before that. And many of the existing programs just don't quite fit or work. And so we had Secretary Vilsack come down to Central Florida, and he made a promise to simplify the relief process through block grants. This bill would do just that, allow USDA to provide needed relief to agriculture producers devastated by natural disasters in 2022 via previously successful block grant strategy, as my dear colleague Kat Kamek mentioned in Hurricane Irma. More than 90% of Florida's citrus production was impacted by tropical storms in 2022, totaling 375,302 acres. And the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services expects these devastating losses to cost between $416 million to $675 million. And citrus is a big industry, obviously, for our state. Also is the main vitamin C source for the nation through orange juice, and generates $6.8 billion annually for a year. The language in the December omnibus unfortunately didn't provide Secretary Vilsack direct authority to disperse the appropriated disaster funds via a block grant. So today we correct that mistake, we streamline the process, and we make sure to get well-needed relief to our citrus growers and others in Florida. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this, and for Ranking Member Scott, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any other members seek recognition for discussion on the bill? Gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was looking at the bills today, and I think they serve a number of good purposes. I guess I'd like a greater clarification as we're looking at disaster relief that's been provided in the past in commodities and agricultural areas that have been so impacted, on the notion, and I don't know who may opine on this, on the block grant provisions and how that may in fact work. I just heard as we talked in about the importance for America's citrus industry, and I certainly understand that and support that. But it's just not clear to me how, under the way we have provided traditional funding for such impacted areas on an individual grower basis, how this will now translate on a block grant, and how well it's been thought out in terms of the distributions of those funds versus the funding, the means of the funding that we provided during the previous budget year. And I don't know if anyone can explain that to me. who wrote the bill and how they want to see the precedent of this take place. But clearly we have, three states in particular, Florida, Texas, and California, that produce just about all of the citrus in the country. And they've all got different challenges that they are facing. And so I just want to know how this has been thought out, and is it a work in progress, and is it something that we can therefore have further input on as it progresses?
Gentleman, yield?
Yes.
The way this language was set up, it basically replicates what has already been done in the past with using block grants in Florida. It gives authority to the secretary to be able to work with the states and specifically looking at different specialty crops, to be able to basically make these awards where it's deemed necessary. So there is a precedent. The particular piece of legislation was built on a precedent that's been used in the past for specialty crops, but specifically just in Florida. We obviously need to broaden that.
And would the gentleman yield or reclaiming my time? Has there been conversations with the USDA and the secretary on how this might go forward?
I'll yield to the gentlelady, the sponsor of this bill, Mrs. Camming.
Well, and thank you to the chairman. Thank you, Representative Costa. This actually stems from conversations with Secretary Vilsack to give him the flexibility and means by which to distribute disaster relief funds to our specialty crops in Florida. There was direct conversations with the USDA as well as testimony within the committee on this. And I'm not sure if you were in the room when I was talking about this, but up until this point, of the $3.7 billion that's been allocated for disaster relief, none has been received by citrus growers in Florida. And it's because of this technical issue that the USDA cannot overcome without direct action from our committee. So this is actually us working hand in glove with USDA to rectify that, to give the necessary flexibility to the secretary to do this.
Well, I thank the gentlewoman from Florida for that explanation, and would just request that we continue to work together on this. As you know, we have a lot of citrus in California, and I want to make sure that this is even-handed and well thought out, and I'll make my own efforts to reach out to the Secretary and to the United States Department of Agriculture to see how they view this as being worked on, assuming we pass it and it's signed into law. Okay? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time, and I look forward to working with all of you on these important efforts. Thank you.
I thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for your leadership with those over 600 specialty crops in California that are produced. Incredibly important.
Thank you.
Anyone else seek to speak on the bill? Seeing none, does any member have any amendment to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill, H.R. 662, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to speak on that motion? All right, seeing none. I'm sorry, what's that? The questions on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 662. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and Bill H.R. 662 is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 662? If so, please have them submitted to the Council's office, room 1407 by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. Very good. We'll move on to the next bill, H.R. 1450, Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act. The bill, H.R. 1450, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbors Act, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived, and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Forestry is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1450. Do any members have remarks on the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentlelady from Washington State is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for including this bill in today's markup. So when I shared this news of this markup with my state forester, he responded in email, "Great news," with 6 exclamation points. Why? This really is great news. This bill gives back the flexibilities under good neighbor authority to tribes and counties who understand that wildfires do not discriminate if they're on federal or non-federal land. And it allows us to use all of the tools at our disposal to mitigate the effects of wildfire and maintain healthy forests. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress expanded good neighbor authority to make tribes and counties eligible to enter into these agreements. However, tribes and counties were not afforded the same authority as states to retain G&A project revenues to reinvest in conservation. This greatly reduced the ability to engage and partner on critical management projects, including wildfire mitigation, invasive species removal, and habitat maintenance. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill removed the ability to carry out restoration services that were agreed to under the Good Neighbor Authority on non-federal lands. As a result, adjacent tribal and county land that is essential to the health and productivity of national forests can no longer be treated as a comprehensive landscape. Skamania County, my home county, was the first in the state to build a relationship with the State Department of Natural Resources to determine how this Good Neighbor Authority could help improve the forest health conditions in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, which make up 80% of Skamania County. This partnership, along with the Forest Service, the state agencies, and Skamania County, has been hugely successful. The county just hired a forester who gives the county extra capacity and expertise to manage larger and more complex G&A projects. The G&A program has quickly and significantly increased the scale and speed at which the county can complete restoration projects. Bolstering this program will bring significant amounts of economic opportunity while protecting forest resources, habitat, and recreational opportunities. The additional flexibility provided by this bill is a common sense fix to a program that's proven to be highly successful. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. And finally, I want to thank Congressman Fulcher for his leadership on this bill. He's been a great partner, and I look forward to working with him and this committee to get this critical legislation over the finish line. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Now recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Forestry, Congressman LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time, appreciate this bill coming forward, and my good colleague from Washington stated very well the direction this bill is going. Indeed, this was initially limited to state forest agencies, this Good Neighbor Authority. It was made permanent in 2014 Farm Bill, expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill by making counties and tribes eligible. What we see here is that we also need to allow them to share in the revenue that they put forward with their good work. So this bill will make that expansion, make that right for our counties and our tribes to be able to indeed be compensated and be good partners on this, because the pace and scale of the work we need to be doing in the forest, we need to have all hands on deck, all possible partners, and they should be able to be paid for their work to do so. As we know, we've had massive wildfire in the west, my own district suffering a lot, but all my neighboring ones as well. We have at least 50 million acres of forest land at high risk currently, and so immediate thinning, restoration is necessary. So having these revenues available to tribes and counties, also one of the good measures is that it'll help to reinvest in adjacent non-federal land areas that are part of the existing Good Neighbor Agreement. It's really indeed a common sense fix that these lands are within our agreement, and our forest health needs are not limited to just federal lands. So I'm very pleased and happy for my colleague, Mr. Fulcher, and all those that came on board to help move this legislation, Mr. Chairman. I support it. Let's all vote aye on H.R. 1450. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from South Dakota, Congressman Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, we know that managed forests are healthy forests, and we also know that the Constitution, court cases, and numerous treaties really tell us that we need to have a government-to-government relationship with Native American tribes. And so I'm always a little concerned when we give states robust authority or opportunities that we don't provide to tribes. This bill is a great opportunity to try to make sure that we're working with tribes as well as with counties to provide the right incentive structures for them to help manage these forests, reduce wildfire. It's a great bill. I'm going to be voting yes.
Thank the gentleman. Please recognize the gentleman from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to echo what the gentleman just said. In particular, I want to highlight the Mescalero Apache tribe in the Lincoln National Forest. They have been asking for this type of authority because they have suffered from the wildfire impacts on national forest lands that have come onto tribal forest and have been unable to collaborate with the U.S. Forest Service to do dual restoration on both forest and tribal lands, and that are, as a result, their economic output has suffered at places like Ski Apache. So this is incredibly important. I know that the Mescalero Apache fully supports this legislation, so I bring a message of support from them. And again, this is a great way to honor that government-to-government relationship and assist sovereign nations in managing and protecting their own tribal lands. I urge all my colleagues to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
Thank the gentleman from New Mexico. Any others to seek to speak on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, just quickly.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Yes, I participated in a intertribal meeting last Friday of sovereign nations, and this issue came out loud and clear, the importance of a good neighbor policy to respect Native American tribal lands in the maintaining and the management of our forests. And the reality is that Native Americans have been managing our forests long before, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I might say in instances that I can point to, in some at least that I'm familiar with, in a better way than we have managed the forests. So this good neighbor policy, I think, is a good example of how we can work together and reflect the wisdom and the understanding of the management of these forests that historically go back to these sovereign nations in ways that we truly don't understand the history and the complexity and the heartfelt attachment and the meaning of this. So it's a good bill, and I'm glad to see all this bipartisan support.
I'm going to take the liberty to recognize myself to speak on this bill, and really to echo what all of my colleagues have said. The Good Neighbor Authority has been an important tool for the Forest Service to increase active forest management by entering into partnership agreements with states, counties, and tribes. And while the 2018 Farm Bill expanded eligibility beyond states to counties and tribes, the law did not authorize those entities to retain timber revenues derived from Good Neighbor Authority agreements as the law authorized for state partners. So to extend that same authority to counties and tribes, this legislation allows those entities to retain such timber revenues. The bill also authorizes states, counties, and tribes to reinvest such funding into restoration projects on non-federal lands that are located within an authorized Good Neighbor Authority agreement. So making this change will further incentivize counties and tribes to enter into more Good Neighbor agreements, authority agreements, and this is going to encourage more public-private partnerships and more landscape-scale forest management projects. So I certainly urge my colleagues to support treating tribes and counties as good neighbors. Anyone else seek recognition to speak on the bill itself? Seeing none, does any member have any amendments to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill, H.R. 1450, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does anybody seek recognition to speak on that motion? Then the question was the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1450.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to seek a recorded vote.
Very good. A recorded vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Lucas. Aye. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. Austin Scott. Aye. Mr. Austin Scott votes aye. Mr. Crawford. Aye. Mr. Crawford votes aye. Mr. Desjardins. Aye. Mr. Desjardins votes aye. Mr. LaMalfa. Aye. Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser. Aye. Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon.
Aye.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost.
Aye.
Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Johnson. Aye. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Baird.
Aye.
Mr. Baird votes aye. Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Feenstra.
Aye.
Mr. Feenstra votes aye. Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller votes aye. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore votes aye. Mrs. Kamick. Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Finstad. Mr. Finstad votes aye. Mr. Rose.
Yes.
Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Jackson of Texas.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Molinaro.
Aye.
Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Ms. De La Cruz. Aye. Ms. De La Cruz votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Aye. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Nunn.
Aye.
Mr. Nunn votes aye. Mr. Alford.
Aye.
Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Van Orden.
Aye.
Mr. Van Orden votes aye. Ms. Chavez DeReamer.
Aye.
Ms. Chavez DeReamer votes aye. Mr. Miller of Ohio. Mr. Miller. Mr. David Scott.
Aye.
Mr. David Scott votes aye. Mr. Costa.
Aye.
Mr. Costa votes aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Ms. Adams.
Adams votes aye.
Ms. Adams votes aye. Ms. Spanberger.
Aye.
Ms. Spanberger votes aye. Mrs. Hayes.
Aye.
Mrs. Hayes votes aye. Ms. Brown.
Aye.
Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Davids of Kansas.
Aye.
Ms. Davids votes aye. Ms. Slotkin.
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Ms. Caraballo.
Aye.
Ms. Caraballo votes aye. Ms. Salinas.
Aye.
Ms. Salinas votes aye. Ms. Glusenkamp Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Glusenkamp Perez votes aye. Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Takuda.
Aye.
Ms. Takuda votes aye. Ms. Budzinski.
Aye.
Ms. Budzinski votes aye. Mr. Sorensen.
Aye.
Mr. Sorensen votes aye. Mr. Vasquez.
Aye.
Mr. Vasquez votes aye. Ms. Crockett.
Aye.
Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Jackson votes aye. Mr. Kazar.
Aye.
Mr. Kazar votes aye. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree votes aye. Mr. Carbajal. Mr. Carbajal. Ms. Craig. Aye. Ms. Craig votes aye. Mr. Soto. Aye. Mr. Soto votes aye. Mr. Bishop.
Aye.
Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Duarte. Mr. Miller of Ohio. Mr. Carbajal.
Have all members voted, and does any member wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the ayes are 51, the nays are 0.
The ayes have it, and the bill, H.R. 1450, is ordered reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1450? If so, please have them submitted to the council's office, room 1407, 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. And we'll move on to H.R. 1713, Department of Energy and U.S. Department of Agriculture Interagency Research Act. The bill, H.R. 1713, the DOE and USDA Interagency Research Act, is now before the committee for consideration without objection. A first reading of the bill will be waived and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Conservation Research and Biotechnology is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1713. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1713, which is at the desk. This amendment incorporates the amendments that were adopted when the Science Committee, which has primary jurisdiction, marked up this bill. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. And I will open this up for members to have remarks on the bill, and I now recognize the author of the bill and our colleague, the gentleman from Oklahoma, for 5 minutes to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From my position as chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and as a member of the House Agriculture Committee, I can clearly see how important and pressing the need is for increased interagency research partnerships. We are facing global competition in all areas of research, but especially in the topics of agriculture and energy. That is why I authored this important piece of legislation to ensure that the federal agencies will be able to continue to collaborate on strategic research that will enhance U.S. competitiveness and economic prosperity for the next generation. My bill, H.R. 1713, the DOE and USDA Interagency Research Act, directs DOE and USDA to carry out cross-cutting research and develop activities focused on the joint advancements of DOE and USDA mission priorities. It directs the Secretary to conduct collaborative research over a range of focus areas and applications, to develop methods to accommodate large data sets on agriculture, environmental, and supply chain information, and to supply research infrastructure and workforce development for both industries. DOE and USDA have a long history of working together to solve tough research problems and find solutions for American taxpayers. By authorizing this partnership, we ensure that USDA can leverage DOE's tremendous expertise and resources for years to come. In doing this, we maximize our return on investment of limited federal research dollars and improve our ability to address research needs in key areas like crop science, carbon storage, precision agriculture, and biofuels, among many other areas. I ask for your support on this common sense, good governance bill, and I thank the chairman for his attention to this important issue, and I yield back the rest of my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to speak on this particular piece of legislation? If not, I'll yield. I'll take 5 minutes to be able to, less than 5 minutes, I promise, to speak on the bill. American agriculture, I've always believed and can be defined simply by 3 words: science, technology, and innovation. And this wouldn't be possible without agricultural research conducted by scientists at USDA and our land-grant universities. That being said, public investment in agricultural research has steadily declined since 2002 when adjusted for inflation, and we're now being outspent by China and other competitors. Now, let me be clear, we're still ahead of them in research, but they are closing the gap. Absent increased funding for agricultural research, this bill will ensure that both USDA and the Department of Energy are working together to fund research that is mutually beneficial to both agencies. I thank Chairman Lucas for his leadership on this issue to increase interagency collaboration and ensure that American agriculture can continue to provide the safest, most abundant, and most affordable food and fiber supply in the world. And with that, I would urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. So, hearing no further discussion, the committee will now consider the whole amendment in nature of a substitute. Does any member have any amendment to the bill? Seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill, H.R. 1713, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
I thank the gentleman. Does any member wish to discuss the motion? The question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1713. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Sir, I would like to request a recorded vote.
So a recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. Mr. Lucas? Aye. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. Austin Scott? Aye. Mr. Austin Scott votes aye. Mr. Crawford? Aye. Mr. Crawford votes aye. Mr. Desjardins? Aye. Mr. Desjardins votes aye. Mr. LaMalfa? Aye. Mr. LaMalfa votes aye. Mr. Rouser?
Aye.
Mr. Rouser votes aye. Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Bacon?
Aye.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Bost?
Aye.
Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Baird?
Aye.
Mr. Baird votes aye. Mr. Mann? Aye. Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Feenstra? Mr. Feenstra votes aye. Mrs. Miller?
No.
Mrs. Miller votes no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes aye. Mrs. Kamick? Aye. Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Finstad? Aye. Mr. Finstad votes aye. Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Jackson of Texas?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson of Texas votes aye. Mr. Molinaro? Aye. Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Ms. De La Cruz? Aye. Ms. De La Cruz votes aye. Mr. Langworthy? Aye. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Duarte? Aye. Mr. Duarte votes aye. Mr. Nunn?
Aye.
Mr. Nunn votes aye. Mr. Alford?
Aye.
Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Van Orden?
Aye.
Mr. Van Orden votes aye. Ms. Chavez de Reamer?
Aye.
Ms. Chavez de Reamer votes aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Miller votes aye. Mr. David Scott?
Aye.
Mr. David Scott votes aye. Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Costa votes aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern votes aye. Ms. Adams?
Adams votes aye.
Ms. Adams votes aye. Ms. Spanberger?
Aye.
Ms. Spanberger votes aye. Mrs. Hayes?
Hayes votes aye.
Mrs. Hayes votes aye. Ms. Brown? Brown votes aye. Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Davids of Kansas?
Aye.
Ms. Davids votes aye. Ms. Slotkin?
Aye.
Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Ms. Caravello?
Aye.
Ms. Caravello votes aye. Ms. Salinas?
Aye.
Ms. Salinas votes aye. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez? Aye. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes aye. Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Takuda?
Aye.
Ms. Takuda votes aye. Ms. Budzinski?
Aye.
Ms. Budzinski votes aye. Mr. Sorensen?
Aye.
Mr. Sorensen votes aye. Mr. Vasquez? Aye. Mr. Vasquez votes aye. Ms. Crockett?
Aye.
Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson votes aye. Mr. Kazar? Mr. Kazar votes aye. Ms. Pingree? Ms. Pingree votes aye. Mr. Carbajal?
Aye.
Mr. Carbajal votes aye. Ms. Craig? Aye. Ms. Craig votes aye. Mr. Soto?
Aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop votes aye.
Have all members voted? And does any member wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the ayes are 53, the nays are 1.
The ayes have it, and the bill, H.R. 1713, is reported favorably to the House. Does any member give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1713? If so, please have them submitted to the council's office, room 1407, by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. We'll now entertain H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act of 2023. Yeah, I'm sorry, that title just makes you smile. Yeah. All right, back to business. The bill H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, the first reading of the bill will be waived, and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Livestock, Dairy, and Poultry is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1480. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1480, which is at the desk. The amendment removes the new authorization of appropriation and also adds an expiration date in order to comply with the House floor protocols. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived, and a substitute will be considered as original text for the purpose of further amendment. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Mr. Bishop from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to rise in support of H.R. 1480, the Beagle Brigade Act. This legislation provides authorization for the Department of Agriculture's National Detector Dog Training Center, which has been instrumental in protecting American agriculture by keeping foreign animal and plant pests and diseases out of the country. The U.S. agriculture sector is a $1 trillion industry constantly under threat of foreign pests and diseases, such as the African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, or citrus greening disease, that could be introduced through our nation's ports of entry, including airports, harbors, mail, and cargo facilities. Some of these diseases could cost the American economy tens of billions of dollars to contain and eradicate if they're detected in the country. Agriculture detector dogs, also known as the Beagle brigade, are an important tool in preventing these threats and eradicating them in the event that they overcome our safeguards. Our Beagle brigade is at work every day. You may have seen them at customs screening in the airport after returning from trips abroad, standing by to alert their handlers to contraband food, live animals, and other products that could harbor foreign pests that pose a threat to domestic crops or livestock. As an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, the brigade is well worth its value in keeping out these pests and diseases before they can become a problem. In addition to authorizing the National Detector Dog Training Center, this bill requires the facility to ensure the health and well-being of the dogs under its care and to provide opportunities for private adoption of retirement-age trained dogs and dogs that don't complete the training. Detector dogs work their best when they are handled humanely, and establishing this requirement in law would ensure that the facility continues to uphold this expectation. I'm pleased to note that the bill has the support of over 50 organizations representing veterinarians, agricultural producers, and animal health groups, and I'm grateful for my colleagues who have co-sponsored the resolution, including my good friend, Representative Drew Ferguson, whose district is home to the National Detector Dog Training Center in Noonan, Georgia. Chairman Thompson has offered an amendment in the nature of the substitute, which will add a sunset provision extending authority until September 30th, 2028, which I fully support. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Scott, for considering the Beagle Brigade bill today, which means so much to our farmers and ranchers as we protect American agriculture. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and urge passage.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to seek to speak on the bill? The gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member. As a dog lover, as so many of us are, I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation, including the bill title. My good friend, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, has introduced great legislation here that will take the training center off the chopping block to continue to do great work. And I'm proud to endorse this legislation and ask for members to do the same. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other members seek recognition to speak on the bill? Okay, if not, I'll recognize myself. Briefly, the National Detector Dog Training Center really serves as an important line of defense in safeguarding America's agricultural and natural resources from harmful pests and diseases. This bill simply codifies the training center that's been in existence since 1984, and I'm glad to see that the center received the recognition and the prioritization it deserves. Happy to support Mr. Sanford's legislation and encourage all my colleagues to do the same. Hearing no further discussion, the committee will now consider the whole amendment in the form of a substitute. Does any member have any amendment to the bill? All right, seeing none, I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill 1480, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1480 as as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 1480 as amended is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Does any member wish to give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1480? If so, have them submitted to the council office, room 1407, by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. The final bill that we'll be considering is H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act of 2023. The bill, H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act of 2023, is now before the committee for consideration, and without objection, a first reading of the bill will be waived and it will be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, the Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development is discharged from further consideration of H.R. 1697. Do any members have remarks on the bill? Recognize the chairman of the Livestock, Poultry, Dairy, and Beagle Subcommittee.
Fair enough.
There you go. I just had to get that in,
growing.
Mr. Chairman. It's growing. Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, thank you. I rise in support of H.R. 1697, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act, legislation that I'm proud to have worked on with Representative Davis. As we all know, ag producers across America have and continue to adopt precision agriculture techniques to more efficiently feed, fuel, and clothe the world. These technological advances have helped producers improve crop yields, make informed management decisions, lower costs, which leads to increased profitability. However, new technology often brings new challenges, like the need to protect producers from cyber threats and for equipment manufacturers and producers alike to be at the table with new legislation created in this area. Congress should ensure that stakeholders have a seat at the table when new regulations are being worked out. That's the wise and fair thing to do. As Congress establishes new standards for precision agriculture, the Promoting Precision Agriculture Act would establish a partnership between the federal government and the private sector to create a voluntary, and that's key, voluntary interconnectivity standards and prioritize the cybersecurity needs for this technology. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act does what the House Ag Committee does so well. It brings together ag producers, stakeholders, and lawmakers to discuss regulations regarding policy and new technologies. I encourage all of my colleagues to vote yes and support the bill, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Others recognized. Mr. Davis, North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member for bringing us forward today. The agriculture community is the backbone of Eastern North Carolina, rural America, and our nation at large. Back home, I constantly hear about the barriers to farmer success, which is why I proudly introduced H.R. 1697 with my colleague, Representative Mann. Precision agriculture includes the use of devices like robotics, sensors, monitors, drones, and more to help our growers increase efficiency, boost crop yields, and lower costs. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act will ensure our growers have the access to cutting-edge precision agriculture technologies that's much needed. This legislation will help support our farmers as we utilize next-generation agriculture to improve our economic outlook. So, Mr. Chair, thank you again, and Representative Mann, and to everyone that's here today. We have an opportunity through this to deliver for our farmers, and I ask for your support with this legislation moving forward. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from North Carolina. He yields back. Anyone else seek recognition to speak on this bill? Please, the gentlelady from Kansas.
My colleagues are teasing me that I just want to say Beagle. Mr. Chairman, thank you for recognizing me to speak in support of this piece of legislation, and I just want to thank Mr. Davis and my colleague from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for working to ensure that there's a partnership between the USDA and the private sector, our farmers and growers, as they implement some key technologies that are going to have a pretty significant impact on their ability to continue to not just feed Kansas and the world, but also put food on their own tables. With that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady. Any other members seek to speak on this bill? If not, I'll recognize myself for just a few comments on H.R. 1697. Farmers, ranchers, and foresters are the best stewards of their land, and they strive to reduce the use of water, fuel, fertilizer, chemicals, and quite frankly, other inputs. Deployment of new technology, including precision agriculture, have resulted in American farmers becoming the most efficient producers of food and fiber anywhere in the world. And because of agricultural innovation, U.S. farm outputs have increased threefold since the 1940s, with little to no change in inputs. Precision agriculture can, among other things, reduce inputs, increase outputs, lower environmental impact, increase integration and efficiency in the supply chain, and provide important cost savings. The Promoting Precision Agriculture Act establishes a partnership between the federal government and the private sector to build standards and best practices for precision agriculture to enhance its adoption throughout the United States. This bill also looks to create guidelines on how to address cybersecurity threats facing precision agriculture, including for ag producers and the ag supply chain. So I'm happy to support this bill and encourage members to vote in favor. Seeing no other members speaking on the bill, does any member have an amendment to the bill? Seeing none, now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill H.R. 1697 be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that it do pass.
Does any member wish to discuss the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from Georgia to favorably report H.R. 1697. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill H.R. 1697 is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Do any members give notice of intent to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 1697? If so, please have them submitted to the Council's Office Room 1407 by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 15th. Without objection, the usual instructions are given to staff that consist of making such technical, clarifying, or confirming changes as are appropriate without changing the substance of the legislation. And this meeting is now adjourned.
Congratulations.
I've got one in, buddy. 5 bills, huh?
Good job.
Thank you.
The committee will come to order. First and foremost, I want to welcome all of you here and say thank you so much for being here today at this hearing, which is titled Stakeholder Perspectives on Agriculture Trade. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses, and then the hearing will be open to questions from members. In consulting with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members aware of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. So I want to start by saying good morning and welcome to the first hearing of the House Committee on Agriculture Subcommittee on Nutrition, Foreign Agriculture, and Horticulture in the 118th Congress. And to Ranking Member Hayes, welcome, and I look forward to working with you. I look forward to working with you to pass a strong farm bill that's written by farmers for farmers and by rural communities for rural communities. And importantly, I want to thank all of you, our witnesses, for taking time to be here today and to share your testimony with us. As a proud fourth-generation farmer raising the fifth, I understand how important a robust trade agenda and economy is to farm country and ensuring viable markets for our producers to ship their commodities to. We know American farmers and ranchers efficiently produce the safest and most affordable fuel, food, and fiber in the world. The value proposition is well known by our partners and consumers around the globe, who purchase more than 20% of U.S. agriculture production. Nevertheless, we are headed towards an agriculture trade deficit of $14.5 billion this year. And our overall trade deficit has reached a staggering $945 billion, the largest ever. And while our top trade competitors continue to negotiate free trade agreements, we hear Biden officials referring to these type of negotiations as 20th century tools. Our market share in key destinations such as Europe and East Asia have declined, yet the Biden administration's sole focus is on frameworking and dialoguing. Given these unfortunate realities, it's imperative that the trade programs in Title III work efficiently and effectively and can be fully utilized by our producers. So as we continue to gather information from stakeholders ahead of the next Farm Bill, we need to have a clear picture of the trading economy our producers are engaged with day in and day out. Today, I look forward to hearing more about that from our expert witnesses, as well as how they utilize the trade programs provided by the Farm Bill and other thoughts they may have for carving a productive pathway forward. While the stagnancy of the current administration's trade agenda is frustrating, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my appreciation for the work of our ag trade officials and what they are doing at USDA and USTR. I welcome the chance to visit with both Undersecretary Taylor and Ambassador McCaleb recently, and I look forward to continued partnership and engaging with them. Before I recognize the distinguished ranking member, a quick note on this subcommittee's activities. There's been some public fodder on the types of topics we should address and when we should address them, namely in the nutrition space. I want to say rest assured we will be discussing those issues, starting at the full committee level during our first work period in June. And now I'd like to recognize the ranking member from from Connecticut, Johanna Hayes. I look forward to a fruitful collaboration through the 118th Congress. And I'd like to welcome you, and please provide us with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses today for testifying about the importance of agricultural trade and how we can improve upon the Title III trade programs. You all have a vital role in our food systems, and I appreciate your testimony. This Congress, we have an enormous responsibility of reauthorizing the Farm Bill, a farm bill that will support our farmers and keep families fed. The public fodder comes from me, because I am deeply concerned about nutrition and have not seen any movement on this committee in the 118th Congress. I am committed to ensuring that no child, no senior, no veteran, no person in this country goes hungry. 2 weeks ago, House Republicans passed a bill putting nearly 1 million Americans at risk of losing SNAP benefits. 34 million Americans struggle with food insecurity, 9 million of which are children. With cuts to SNAP at the forefront of every budget discussion, it is incomprehensible how this committee has not held any public hearings on the full committee or the subcommittee to discuss this topic in the 118th Congress. We have an obligation to the American people to let them know where we stand on this issue and have discussions in an open forum. Nutrition programs account for 76% of the $1.4 trillion Farm Bill. Programs like the Emergency Food Assistance Program, the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Programs, and commodity supplemental food programs also deserve our attention. The Farm Bill includes nutrition, so we must pass a bill that meets the needs of all people in all communities. The members of this subcommittee must have a chance to review nutrition programs and work in a way that puts food on the tables of American people. Today, however, we're here to receive testimony from stakeholders on Title III agricultural trade programs. The United States is one of the top agricultural exporters, trailing only the European Union. However, farmers and producers are navigating a new landscape. Natural disasters, climate change, and shipping costs impact the agricultural market. I'm also concerned with the protective measures used by our international trade partners, from arbitrary restrictions on U.S. products to import duties, tariffs on specific products. I'm happy to see the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. trade representatives are responding to these problems. I am also committed to addressing these barriers and protecting the agricultural markets for producers in this country. Title III of the Farm Bill contains several important trade programs. The Market Access Programs helps trade associations and small businesses build export marks through marketing and promotions. The Market Development Programs creates, expands, and maintains foreign markets for generic U.S. products. These and other programs work cohesively to build, develop, and maintain foreign markets. An expanded market for food products brings stability to everyone in the food and agriculture sector, from farmers and producers to truck drivers to food retailers and grocers and restaurant workers. The livelihoods of these workers are dependent on a robust agricultural market. According to the USDA, the agricultural, food, and related industries contribute roughly $1.2 trillion to U.S. gross domestic product and $196 billion for agriculture exports. This activity also supports about 71,000 jobs and $4.5 billion in wages to my district. We have before us an impressive and very qualified group of witnesses, and I'm excited to hear testimony on both the Title III trade programs and the overall state of agricultural trade, and I look forward to working with the chair of this committee to make sure that the nutrition space gets the attention that it deserves in the upcoming Farm Bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Hayes. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony and ensure that there is ample time for questions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our testifiers here. Our witnesses today our first witness today is Mr. John Griffith, who is the Executive Vice President of Ag Business and Hedging at CHS, Inc. He also serves as the Chairman of the North American Export Grain Association. Our next witness is Ms. Lori Stevemer, who is the president-elect of the National Pork Producers Council, but more importantly, a resident of Southern Minnesota's 1st Congressional District, and someone that we are very, very, very proud of and really respect her awesome leadership. Our third witness today is Mr. Matt Lance, who is the Vice President for Global Access at Bryant Christie, Inc. And our fourth and final witness today is Ambassador Greg Dowd, who is the Vice President of Global Situational Awareness and Chief Economist for Aimpoint Research. Ambassador Dowd previously served as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator in the Office of the United States Trade Representative. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will now proceed with your testimony. You will each have 5 minutes. The timer in front of you will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. And so we'll start first. Mr. Griffith, please begin when you are ready.
Chairman Finstad, Ranking Member Hayes, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify on the important topic of agricultural trade. My name is John Griffith. I'm Executive Vice President of Agricultural Business and Hedging for CHS Inc., a Minnesota-based U.S. farmer-owned cooperative and global grains and energy company owned by over 600,000 farmers and ranchers nationwide. I also serve as the chairman of North American Export Grain Association, or NAGA for short. NAGA is a nonprofit trade association whose members export the majority of all U.S. grain and oilseeds to international markets. Today, I would like to convey our hope that members will work together to pass the Comprehensive Farm Bill to provide certainty to U.S. farmers, which in turn enables us to compete freely and fairly with our global trade partners. Let me briefly address 3 topics: market access programs, food aid, and supply chains. To say that trade is important to American agriculture is an understatement. Trade is the lifeblood of American agriculture, and global demand for food has never been greater. However, in the past few years, major events such as COVID epidemic and the war in Ukraine have disrupted global supply chains, causing a profound impact on agriculture. While these crises present an opportunity for U.S. farmers, global competition requires United States leadership in fostering trade policies that allow farmers to fulfill changing global demand. We must promote global science-based policies and break down tariff and non-tariff barriers to entry. We appreciate the work done by Secretary Vilsack and Undersecretary Alexis Taylor in being a voice for these issues, yet more work remains in the pursuit of market access opportunities for U.S. farmers and ranchers. As you work with your Senate colleagues to reauthorize the Farm Bill, we urge you to recognize the need for additional funds to the Market Access Program and the Foreign Market Development Program. These 2 programs have been enormously successful, expanding exports and supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs. NAGA is pleased to have been a participant in the Market Access Program since the 1990s. Combined with industry support, the program has enabled NAGA to promote best practices and policies in agriculture trade. One success story from these programs involves Vietnam. Using program funds, the U.S. wheat industry engaged a potential new customer in Vietnam starting in 2019. Today, that company purchases over $12 million worth of U.S. wheat and has reported that flour made from U.S. wheat is now, and I quote, irreplaceable. With that said, these programs have remained stagnant in their funding levels since 2002. A significant increase to MAP and FMD funding in the next Farm Bill will help U.S. agriculture protect our existing markets while helping to grow and establish new export markets elsewhere. The Feeding the Hungry People through U.S. food aid programs has benefited millions of people throughout the world. Food aid programs also represent a key component of the U.S. bulk grain exports. As exporters, we see the opportunity to strengthen U.S. food aid programs and reduce unintentional damage to commercial markets. As such, NAGA supports policies that improve financial sustainability to maximize performance in the delivery of U.S. food aid. We also support policies that align food aid programming with national market development objectives and domestic agriculture support programs. A reliable infrastructure system is crucial to ship agriculture goods abroad. CHS recently announced a $105 million expansion to our facility in Myrtle Grove, Louisiana, that will allow CHS to move over 300 million bushels of grain annually. CHS is committed to identifying new market opportunities and investing in export infrastructure, but it's important that the U.S. government partner in this effort through investment and the timely distribution of appropriated funds from legislation approved by Congress last year. In conclusion, agriculture is a global industry. The ability to export agriculture goods to hungry customers across the world is crucial to both the success of CHS as a company and the livelihoods of our farmer and rancher owners. However, we are seeing the global agriculture trade flows shift, often away from the United States and towards our competitors as new trade alliances form. If the United States is to remain the global leader in feeding the world, we must enact trade policies and support programs that best allow American farmers and agribusinesses like CHS to do what we do best: grow and sell the safest, most abundant, and reliable food in the world. I humbly thank you for this opportunity and would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. We'll now move on to Ms. Stevermer.
Well, good morning, Chairman Finstead, Ranking Member Hayes, and members of the subcommittee. I am Lori Stevermer. My husband Dale and I raise pigs and crops near Easton, Minnesota, and I work for Alltech as a customer success manager as part of the U.S. pork business team. I'm also president-elect of the National Pork Producers Council. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of NPPC and the nation's 66,000 pork producers. Trade is critical to the U.S. pork industry. Last year, we exported nearly $7.7 billion worth of pork, and those exports supported 155,000, mostly rural U.S. jobs, and added $14.5 billion to the country's GDP. More importantly, exports equated to about $61 per head, and about 25% of our pork is exported. The U.S. pork industry, like a lot of industries, has gone through some tough times over the past several years, but exports continue to be a bright spot for producers. Our trade successes can largely be attributed to our ability to produce the world's safest, most nutritious, most affordable, and to fair and unfettered access to foreign markets negotiated through comprehensive trade agreements. It is clear that such agreements are why we have been, on average, the top pork exporter in the world over the past decade. U.S. pork exports have increased more than 1,800% in value and more than 1,500% in volume since 1989, the year the U.S. implemented its first substantial free trade agreement. Comprehensive trade deals eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers to U.S. goods, and they are vehicles for setting science-based standards and for resolving trade disputes that may arise. Policies that foster the free flow of goods and expand export markets are critical to the continued success of America's pork producers, U.S. agriculture, and the overall American economy. The bottom line, the United States needs more comprehensive trade agreements. The U.S. pork industry has several trade priorities. First, negotiate better market access for U.S. agriculture in the Asia-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity is a good starting point, but market access and elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers should be part of the discussion. Separately, the U.S. should continue urging the Philippines and Vietnam, which are in the IPEF, to make the tariff reductions on pork they imported the past couple of years permanent. Both countries have tremendous potential for U.S. pork exports. Second, urge China to drop its 25% retaliatory tariff on U.S. pork muscle cuts. Coupled with its MFN tariff, U.S. pork pays a 33% tariff compared with 8% rate for our competitors in the market. Third, leverage U.S. preferential trade programs, such as the Generalized System of Preference and the African Growth and Opportunity Act, to open markets that currently restrict U.S. pork exports, despite those countries getting duty-free access to the United States. Fourth, addressed our own trade-limiting policies, including restrictions on H-2A visas that don't allow their use for year-round farm and packing plant labor, and a proposed labeling rule that would likely violate WTO trade rules and could prompt retaliation from our trading partners. Fifth, prevent African swine fever from reaching the U.S. mainland. If we can't do this, all those other priorities will be irrelevant. An ASF outbreak in the U.S. would immediately close foreign markets to our pork exports, devastating our producers and other proteins and the corn and soybean meal farmers who provide livestock feed. That's why it's imperative we focus on prevention and planning for all foreign animal diseases. In conclusion, fair and unfettered trade has helped the United States become an economic powerhouse. To maintain that position, the country must expand trade in existing markets and open new markets, and it must resolve issues that could negatively affect our ability to trade. For the U.S. pork industry, that means negotiating comprehensive trade agreements that eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers, expanding market access in the Asia-Pacific, including by getting China to remove its retaliatory tariff on pork, leveraging and renewing U.S. preferential trade programs, addressing the country's labor shortage, keeping the U.S. free from African swine fever, and adequately funding federal agencies that deal with foreign animal diseases. Thank you for allowing me to testify. I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stevermer. We got a gift of rain back home, so you couldn't plant corn, so it's great that you're able to be here and spend your time. We'll move on now to Mr. Lance. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Finstad, Ranking Member Hayes, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Matt Lance, and I'm the Vice President for Global Access at Bryant Christie Incorporated, a Seattle and Sacramento-based consulting firm dedicated to helping U.S. farmers export. For the past 24 years, I have worked to open and maintain U.S. markets for U.S. fruit, vegetable, and nut growers. Our firm represents industries as diverse as potatoes, almonds, hops, berries, and tree fruit. My work is focused on tariffs, sanitary and phytosanitary barriers, and overcoming non-tariff barriers. We cooperate closely with USTR and USDA's FAS and APHIS. I would like to focus my presentation on two important issues for the horticultural sector. The first is the continuing and growing challenge of differing pesticide maximum residue levels around the world, and the second is the importance of the Technical Assistance for Specialty Crops program. Differing pesticide MRLs are among the fastest growing and most challenging trade barriers all U.S. farmers face. A U.S. farmer can do everything right. They can follow the pesticide label, sustainably grow their crop, and keep meticulous records. The product can be perfectly compliant in the United States, but when they reach a foreign shore, because that country does not have a standard established or that standard is more restrictive, the product can be rejected. Such costs of rejection are high. The shipment must be re-exported or destroyed. Fees add up and sanctions can be placed on the shipper. Beyond the shipper, entire industries may be subject to elevated testing and public may lose confidence in the product, all for a product that is fully compliant in the United States. Originally, the United States was one of the few countries in the world that had MRL standards. Over the course of the last 20 years, numerous markets have transitioned to their own MRL systems. Let me give you an example. On January 1st, 2022, the Korean government implemented a new comprehensive MRL policy. It implemented a long transition policy that allowed sufficient time for many U.S. commodity groups to seek and establish hundreds of MRLs in Korea. Unfortunately, even with a smooth transition, issues can emerge. Just before Christmas 2021, I was contacted by the U.S. potato industry. Despite obtaining over 100 MRLs in Korea, an application for an important pesticide had not been made, and worse still, much of the 2021 potato crop had already been treated with the compound. There was a high risk of a residue violation, and over $100 million worth of trade was at risk. Fortunately, working with USTR, FAS, the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, and the Korean government, a new MRL was established in record time, 4 months. And there was a minimal trade disruption, but the potato industry was fortunate. Finding such a fast and workable solution is not often the case. Perhaps the biggest challenge currently facing U.S. agriculture regarding MRLs is the European Union's pesticide policies. While the U.S. and most of the rest of the world considered hazard and risk in determining their MRLs, the EU only considers hazard. This conservative methodology is causing harm to U.S. and global exports. The upshot of the EU's policy is a reduction of thousands of MRLs to levels lower than U.S. international standards. As a result, U.S. farmers exporting to Europe cannot apply needed crop protection products due to concerns. For example, the U.S. cranberry industry exports over $80 million of product to Europe, but cannot use its most effective and widely used fungicide when shipping to Europe because of their reduced MRL. Moreover, the EU is seeking to export this methodology to other markets. If that is successful, we will all have major negative impacts on U.S. agriculture exports. MRLs are incredibly challenging, albeit somewhat dry, and USTR and USDA are now working hard to ensure that our exports are not hindered, which leads me to task. The Technical Assistance for Specialty Crop Program is funded under the 28 Farm Bill at $9 million annually. Although smaller than the other grant programs administered by FAS, TASK plays a crucial role for specialty crop growers in addressing barriers that may emerge. Since its inception, TASK funds have been used to address a variety of trade issues, including MRLs. Crucially, TASK funds are used to ensure that anyone in the U.S. has access to the MRL database. This database allows all U.S. growers to immediately know what the foreign MRLs are, so issues can be avoided. Without this database, rejections of U.S. shipments would occur on a regular basis. But TASK is not just for MRLs. It can be used for many trade barriers. Perhaps one of its greatest successes has been to assist with the opening of the Mexican market for U.S. fresh potatoes. In 2014, 3 weeks after the Mexican market opened, the Mexican potato growers filed 10 court cases to halt all U.S. fresh potato exports. In response, the National Potato Council applied for task funds to hire experts in Mexico City to challenge this trade barrier. Their work culminated in the Mexican Supreme Court ruling unanimously in favor of U.S. potato exports in 2022. Without tasks, the market would remain closed. In the years since the market is open, our shipments have grown by 56% in terms of value. TASK plays an important role in keeping specialty crops in key export markets. The U.S. specialty crop growers know when an unexpected trade barrier emerges, the TASK is an option. We urge its continued support. I'd be happy to answer any questions about this or other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Now I'd like to welcome Ambassador Dowd. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Finstad, Ranking Member Hayes, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to share my perspectives on the future of U.S. agricultural export opportunities. The future for U.S. ag exports is bright, assuming that supportive trade, farm, and regulatory policies are in place. Much has been accomplished over the years, which allowed U.S. ag exports last year to reach a record $196 billion. But there's more work to be done, and the strategy going forward must seek to leverage every opportunity to increase U.S. market access despite the absence of TPA. TPA would certainly be preferable and to a successful strategy to enhance U.S. ag exports, and I agree with those who believe a bilateral trade agreements with the UK and Kenya should be pursued. However, there are still many important ways that we can make progress and improve market access even without TPA. I could give many examples over the years where SBS issues have been resolved via the sheer fortitude of our incredible government officials at USTR and USDA's Foreign Ag Service in coordination with the many cooperator programs that leverage farmer-paid checkoff dollars in combination with taxpayer funds. The return on investment of these funds used in combination with the FMD, MAP, and the TASK program have been without a doubt our best investment in the future of U.S. agriculture. The surest way to increase U.S. ag exports in the future is to expand upon these hugely successful programs. I also think the creation of the Undersecretary of Trade position at USDA has been a marvelous strategic decision, further elevating the importance of ag trade within USDA and the U.S. government. Going forward, we need other countries to understand that the U.S. is willing to make agricultural trade a priority with our relationship. We need infrastructure improvement, both domestically and in our customers' countries, such as improvement in cold chain infrastructure and technologies. We have a tremendous advantage in value-added agricultural exports, and much work is yet to be done to reach our potential in this area. To continue and expand on the excellent work that has been done by USDA and USTR in the past decade to help countries utilize and understand the critical importance of international standard-setting bodies such as Codex to foster the acceptance of technology and innovations in agriculture. For the past couple of years, I have worked for Aimpoint Research. We specialize in helping firms in agriculture understand what's going to happen 5, 10, 20 years out. The pace of change regarding technology in agriculture today is unbelievable and is rapidly accelerating. The challenge will be how our customers and their governments accept and adapt to these new technologies. We must not allow the recalcitrance of a few to inhibit the way forward. As I explained to my Chinese counterpart during the Phase 1 negotiations, the U.S. will never apologize for pursuing new technologies in agriculture. To be successful, this topic of technology and innovation will still fall back on the basic principles of international trade. You've got to work with your customers and have that relationship. There is a role for all of us here to play in this effort. The U.S. private sector spent $12.3 billion pursuing new innovation and technology in ag in 2021 and $10.6 billion last year.
My most pressing concern, however, is getting our government and other governments around the world to approve these technologies so these innovations, which improve the environment, safety, and nutrition of the food we produce for consumers everywhere, can be commercialized. Given recent regulatory developments in Canada and South American countries, the U.S. is falling behind in this aspect. The U.S. government must expeditiously implement regulatory frameworks for new technologies that are risk proportionate and accessible to all types of entities, big and small, public and private. I share the view of many who believe the greatest opportunity ahead involves our ability to grow and export protein, all types of protein, all around the world. Over the next 10 years, the supply of protein in the world will not come anywhere near meeting the demand. Without question, the country that can best meet this demand is the United States. This opportunity is ours for the taking. And if we start today and set up a winning strategy to meet this challenge. As a partner in a cow-calf operation myself, I look forward to being a part of this strategy and this great nation's ability to meet this global demand for agricultural exports. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Dowd, and thank you all for your testimony and for being here on this very important topic. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members, and in order of arrival for those who joined us after the hearing convened. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get through as many questions as possible. So I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. So, Ms. Stevermer, thank you for noting in your testimony the urgent importance of preparedness and response to African swine fever. We must take the devastating consequences of this threat to our farm and food security seriously through an all-of-government approach. According to a recent report by Iowa State University, if African swine fever were to reach our shores, it would cause an immediate 40 to 50% reduction in U.S. hog prices and up to $15 billion in industry losses over the first 2 years. Would you walk the subcommittee through the impact of trade, the impact on trade if ASF were to hit the United States?
Thank you, Representative Finstead. First of all, I would say that the introduction of a foreign animal disease, such as ASF, would mean the loss of family farms. That's because, as you alluded to, it stops exports, which is 25% of our pork right now, and was worth $61 a head last year in 2022. So that's lost revenue. But ASF doesn't just affect pork producers. It affects corn and soybean meal farmers because there's fewer pigs to eat their products. It goes even further than that, and it affects agribusiness because now feed suppliers, equipment suppliers, building suppliers have customers like pork producers that have fewer pigs and lost income. So it's a ripple effect, and it's affecting our rural economy, or would affect a rural economy. And quite honestly, the thought of ASF on our shores is one of the most concerning things to me as a pork producer and someone involved with agribusiness.
Thank you for that. As you well know, in southern Minnesota, we have counties that have more pork than people, so it's definitely important to our district and really to our country. Moving on, Ambassador Dowd, as you know, the Mexican government's decree banning biotech corn imports for human consumption is a red line for many corn growers in southern Minnesota. We must take the necessary steps to hold Mexico to their agreements under the USMCA, and as you mentioned in your testimony, it's critical that we defend science-based trade. Until now, never before in the history of trade in GMOs has a country singled out a crop for import ban. Do you believe countries like the EU and UK are closely watching how we address the Mexican decree?
Well, I think the EU is always watching because they use these issues as a non-tariff trade barrier to keep products out. I think in the case of Mexico, though, this is a play of domestic political consumption. I don't think it matters really what the science is to AMLO, and he's going to continue to do this, which makes my point of what I want to say here very important. These enforcement mechanisms in these trade agreements, and we put a lot of effort into this brand new enforcement mechanism in USMCA, is critical. We need to use them. I think we are going to use them in this case, and that component of what we do in our trade policy is very, very important because folks are going to cheat. They're going to try to cheat. You know, Canada and dairy is doing the same thing. And we need to use the teeth in these agreements to get where we need to be at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll close up here with one last question. So at the end of May, the Biden administration launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and our farmers have spent several years expressing the importance of market potential and fair access to the Indo-Pacific region. It was disappointing to see the framework does not include market access provisions, including tariff reductions for U.S. agriculture exports. While other countries are moving aggressively to gain market access, the Biden administration has refused to engage. So, Mr. Griffith, would you speak to how farm country benefits from pursuing trade agreements that reduce or eliminate tariffs, resulting in true market access for U.S. ag exports?
Thank you, Chairman Finstead, for that question. Market access, specifically through tariff reduction activity, is greatly beneficial to agribusiness and farmers. It can have an oversized impact on the general health of the agriculture economy. U.S. farmers need markets to sell what they grow, and 95% of consumers are outside of the United States, so exports is critically important. We've seen time and again that even a marginal improvement to market access tend to make a disproportionate positive impact in improvements to commodity prices that are felt all the way back to the farm. So every bit of effort in this regard, albeit small or large, is cumulative and important to and impactful to the farm gate prices of commodities.
Thank you for that, and thank you all again for being here. We'll move on to Ranking Member Hayes.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Predictably, I'd like to speak about nutrition. A significant barrier to nutritious food is cost. However, a stable agricultural market can also keep food prices stable. Mr. Griffiths, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has made a significant impact on global food security, especially with access to grain in northern Africa. How has this impacted U.S. grain trade, and did the extension of the Black Sea grain deal help to stabilize markets?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The extension of the Black Sea trade corridor absolutely greatly contributes to food security into those areas. The Ukraine is a significant and an important producer of agricultural products to the world. And we certainly are supportive of the extension of that activity. The conflict in general in the Ukraine obviously has disrupted global trade and tightens up global supply and demand economics, and other countries have been benefactors of that, including the United States. One of the things that is important about the United States agricultural supply chain and the work that we do together as public and private members is have the most reliable, secure supply chain and agricultural support export system in the world. And when there's disruption in the world, buyers come to the United States, which I think is good evidence of the work that we do together and that we should do more of it.
Thank you. Many specialty crop growers face unique challenges in developing product export markets. Climate, pests, disease, and trade barriers can make work harder for U.S. producers. The U.S. exports of specialty crops reached $24.9 billion in fiscal year 2021, accounting for 14.5% of total U.S. agricultural exports. USDA programs like Technical Assistance to Specialty Crops, or TASC, can support the sale of specialty crops abroad. Specifically, TASC funds projects to address sanitary and phytosanitary issues or technical barriers to trade that threaten U.S. specialty crops. In the past, USDA has awarded grants to help increase the shelf life of produce, fund research, and detect pathogens and help navigate foreign regulations. Mr. Lance, I've heard that TASC can be challenging to navigate. What can Congress do to streamline participation in TASC, and what efforts can be made specifically to this program as we enter the next Farm Bill?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. TASC, as I mentioned in my testimony, is incredibly important for specialty crop growers. TASC utilization has increased significantly in the recent years, and it has become more streamlined. The challenge with using TASC is we don't always know what the trade barrier is going to be. The fact that it is there is a safety net. I think that TASC is ably administered by FAS, and I get a lot of TASC grants and work on a lot of them with groups. But the knowledge that it is there and its usage for specialty crop growers continues to be important, and I think it needs to continue to be funded at the levels. As far as improvements, I think the improvements have already been made, as you can see from the usage of the product, or of the grant. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I am particularly interested in looking at, because we've heard it across every sector on every issue, is navigating these programs, modernizing the way people access these programs, and really streamlining the information that surrounds all of these programs. So any assistance that any of the members of the panel can give in this area would be greatly appreciated, because our efforts should include making these programs easier to access, not more difficult at the federal level. With that, I yield back. Thank you so much for your time.
I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Lance, you answered my first question because it was on task just then. So, Ms. Hayes, I appreciate you asking it. I had the same question about how it helps. And Ms. Stephen Mayor, you mentioned something that I hope the public picks up on, is that if African swine fever made its way to the shores of this country, it wouldn't just impact the pork producers. It would have a devastating impact on commodity prices of corn and anything else that is used in feed of our pork population. And that's something I think that maybe we don't pay enough attention to, is the risk of disease coming into the country and the impact it would have on ag and ag markets. Mr. Griffith, moving to you, you mentioned new trade alliances. And you mentioned in the context of new trade alliances between countries other than the United States, I believe. Is that correct?
New trade alliances around the world other than the United States, yes.
The Biden administration, President Biden, has referred to FTAs, or free trade agreements, as 20th century tools. I don't agree with his assessment of that. Do you think that free trade agreements are 20th century tools? Are they useless?
No, I would not say they are useless, but I might yield the question to Ambassador Dowd to talk about trade policy.
Yeah, I was going to ask him the same thing, but if I could finish with you, Mr. Griffith, other countries, including our adversaries, seem to be overshadowing U.S. agriculture commodities in the world market due to the current approach to trade and other issues. How have you seen export markets and trading practices shift with this new attitude from the Biden administration towards agricultural trade?
Well, as I said in testimony, other countries outside of the U.S. forging trade agreements in a dynamic market like global commodity trade, and the long runway that it takes to ramp up trade agreements. The activity on this and being diligent and deliberate and continuous is critically important, that we continue to be active, and we support those type of activities because of the time it takes to implement and the time to get to impact, and the long times it takes to actually negotiate those deals.
I think one of the key words you mentioned there is continuous. This doesn't stop. When you have a change of administrations, you can't simply undo what the previous administration did because you don't like the name or the person. And I think that is not doing anything in the last 24 months, I think is going to have long-term lasting impacts on our ag exports. Mr. Dowd, moving to you, do you believe that FTAs are an outdated tool? How have you seen the principles of science, technology, and innovation be implemented by our existing trade practices, and what room for improvement would you suggest?
I definitely do not think they're an outdated tool. I do think they're a heavy lift. They are an enormous amount of work. They have to be a top priority of the administration, and many of you know, once we negotiated USMCA, Ambassador Lighthizer, Ambassador Mahoney, myself, we were up here for hundreds of meetings to work through this process of getting Congress to pass these deals. But once you get one passed, here's the important thing. USMCA is the gold standard. It sets the tone for everybody else in the world to see how we deal with regulatory issues in agriculture, SPS issues, technology issues. And now we have something going forward that we can show other folks. The challenge is that it's difficult to do something like that, a gold standard agreement with somebody like Kenya. And so you have to have flexibility working back and forth, and that's a great challenge that we have, but they're absolutely worth the effort.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations, Chairman Finstad, on your first hearing. This is an important subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you and colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make sure that we get a farm bill with a very strong and robust nutrition title. However, I do want to associate myself with the opening remarks of our ranking member. 35 million Americans are hungry. This is a huge issue, and it needs to be prioritized, and I think there needs to be some greater urgency. There's a narrative out there that some are pushing that, quite frankly, in my opinion, does not represent the reality. And I fear that issues that fall under the jurisdiction of this committee are being determined by other committees. 2 weeks ago, during the consideration of the Republican deficit reduction bill in the Rules Committee, I was shocked to hear the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and the chairman of the Budget Committee talk about their bill, which would have negatively impacted SNAP, but unable to answer the most basic questions. Including, they were unable to answer a question about how much the benefit was. So I think it's important that we do more in this subcommittee quickly, because we all want a farm bill, and we all want to make sure that nobody in this country goes hungry. And any farm bill that hurts vulnerable people, I think we all should understand is going nowhere. Now, this is a hearing on trade, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and there are some important ties to food security. The Commerce Department is engaged in ongoing anti-dumping duty investigations into tin mill products from 8 countries. I'm concerned about the impact that imposing tariffs can have on manufacturers and consumers at a time of already high inflation and grocery prices. Food insecurity sits at its highest level in 4 years due to record inflation and the expiration of pandemic-era aid. This is according to the Urban Institute. For households with children, the problem is especially acute. Increased costs for canned goods would particularly impact vulnerable populations. Food banks and consumers who rely on government nutrition and feeding assistance programs such as SNAP and WIC. Studies estimate that tariffs are expected to raise canned food prices by 19 to 30%, which is equivalent to 36 cents to 58 cents per can. Based on the average purchase of 7.1 canned items per week by SNAP WIC recipients, this could be equivalent to more than $16 out of the monthly allowance. So my question for any witness is, how can we limit the negative impact of trade decisions downstream that contribute to rising grocery prices, like the recent consideration of tariff duties that would increase the cost of canned food products? Ambassador?
Am I the default here? Okay.
Well,
So, Congressman, that's a great question. And the answer is, and I have a master's degree in agricultural economics where you study this and you say this is the right answer and consumers pay those tariffs, all other things being equal. But Congressman, the answer in this case is that all other things are not equal, because you have the Communist Party of China with their thumb on the scale, where they are subsidizing, they are maintaining these industries to dominate these industries, and something has to be done. or you're going to, and particularly in the case of aluminum and steel, you're not going to have a domestic industry whatsoever. And so it's a crude instrument, tariffs are, to deal with these issues, but frankly, it was the only tool in the toolbox, and it was something that had to be done.
Mr. Lance, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't. It's not one of my areas of expertise.
Anyone else want to comment?
You know, I would just say that as a pig farmer, I've had the opportunity to visit with a lot of consumers at city festivals, state fairs, health expos. Pork is a wholesome, nutritious, and economical source of protein. I understand your concerns with nutrition and people needing a wholesome, economical source of protein, and I just, like to remind people that that's where pork fits in. I think it's part of a nutrition program, whether it's as an individual or as part of a national program, and just support healthy labels that allow us to consistently have, or that are based on current nutrition science.
Well, I like pork too, so I'm not here to, I'm just trying to make the point that some of our actions kind of at the trade level could have an adverse impact on the very people who, quite frankly, are struggling with food insecurity right now. And so if the cost of a can, increases substantially, and we're not increasing people's benefits, that means people have access to less food. So that, I don't know whether anyone else wants to add anything, but in any event, I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much.
I would now like to recognize the chairman of the committee, of the full Ag Committee, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, for this important subcommittee hearing on trade. I want to thank our witnesses for sharing their time and their expertise. Agriculture is the backbone to most of the world's economies and heavily relies on international trade, which helps farmers back home and abroad increase their revenue, expand their business opportunities, and most importantly, feed, clothe, and fuel the world. Trade is also a vital lifeline for rural America. Increased export opportunities often lead to job creation, wage growth, and improved communities. Many of you have heard me talk incessantly about how important science, technology, innovation are to trade or to agriculture, and trade competition can act as a catalyst for innovation and production techniques as well, not to mention a host of other areas contributing to the resilience of U.S. agriculture. I want to just a couple questions here. One, a really current one, and in 2020, Mexico published a presidential decree. I guess in our country that would be an executive order. At least that's how it was explained to me from folks from Mexico, actually. So kind of pretty unilateral. And it was on genetically modified corn, saying that it would ban GM corn and the use of herbicide glyphosate by January 31st, 2024. Earlier this year, Mexico modified its decree by eliminating the deadline to ban GM corn for animal feed and industrial use, but left in place its plans to ban GM corn use for dough or tortillas. These actions lack science-based evidence and appear to be in violation of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, commonly referred to as USMCA. Now, I was pleased to see USTR request technical consultations under the sanitary and phytosanitary major chapter of USMCA, but I remain concerned about the potential fallouts that could occur if this action is not corrected. Ambassador Dowd, are you concerned that these types of protectionist measures, ones that are not based in real science, will become more prevalent worldwide if the dispute with Mexico is not swiftly resolved?
Mr. Chairman, it's a great question, and the answer is I am very concerned about countries adopting technology in agriculture, period. We have a mountain of new technology coming at us all of the time. But one of the greatest technologies and innovations in the last 40 years, the OG of climate-smart agriculture, is glyphosate, Roundup. I can't imagine what we would do in a world without that technology today. What it does for us in terms of soil erosion, water quality, conservation, the use of cover crops, the use of no-till technology is all dependent upon that technology of many, many years ago. And the fact that now we have all of these new technologies coming in behind this, we have to be able to help regulators in countries around the world understand this use of technology in order to be successful.
Well, thank you for that. We had, in one of our listening sessions, roundtable we did recently in North Carolina, we had a chance, just by happenstance, sit down and have breakfast with the ambassador from India to the United States. Mr. Griffith, earlier this year, the U.S. was joined by Australia, Canada, Paraguay, Thailand, and Ukraine in filing a counter-notification with the World Trade Organization that documents how India's subsidies to their rice and wheat farmers far exceed allowable limits, effectively allowing them to sell their commodities to the rest of the world at a lower than world market prices. With your experience in global commodity trading, can you share with us how India's oversubsidization impacts U.S. grocers, and are you supportive of a formal dispute process to ensure India is compliant with their WTO commitments?
Thank you for the question. I will say just, generally, we are supportive of free and fair trade, and, the mechanisms to get there, to support that type of global activity. I would prefer to maybe yield to Ambassador Dowd about the trade topic specifically from a policy perspective, because I think he's better suited to answer the question, or we could follow up.
Well, why don't we follow up this time, since my time has expired. If we can have those communications outside of here, that would be great. I will just share that the ambassador from India was, we set for a 2-hour breakfast in Cary, North Carolina. We just happened to be there at the same time, and he's expressed a significant desire to trade, improve trade with the United States. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses today for taking the time to be here. We've heard a lot about the importance of paving the way for exports, and as a Texan, I get it. In Texas, we export more than any other state, so believe me when I say I hear y'all, we need these export programs. I know how important things like FMD and MAP are. I also know that as a freshman, these hearings have been so useful for me, getting to hear from people really affected by the policies we are debating here in DC. We have had great conversations about many of the titles we're reauthorizing in the Farm Bill, and I'm excited to turn our attention to Title III. But I hope that we can augment our panel today by hearing from the administrators of the critical food aid and international exchange programs also housed in Title III. These programs not only represent cornerstones of developing economies, but also of U.S. foreign policy. They represent lifelines to opportunity. These programs are an essential part of the Farm Bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I am requesting that we convene another hearing or even consider a listening session abroad so that we can hear from all Title III stakeholders and beneficiaries. But that is for a future time. Right now, I appreciate all of the witnesses who came here today. You've already spoken about the need to fund our market access programs, but I also want to talk about some no-cost measures. We are hearing a lot about the difficulty of starting a farm today. It is critical that we get new folks into farming, which means addressing the considerable barriers to entry. Specifically, I want to focus on the trade component. As a new farmer, it can be difficult to use these programs to access foreign markets. So my first question for each member of this panel is, what is your organization doing to get new farmers into the export market, and how can Congress assist you?
Thank you for the question. I work with many different agricultural groups, and most of those are commissions or boards, and typically they have growers or farmers who are part of those, and then they have trade committees. And they can join these trade committees, and I report to a lot of them on what the opportunities are. So that is incredibly important, is first knowing the lay of the land and where they can possibly export. From there, these organizations provide assistance. They provide trade leads where somebody might from Taiwan say, hey, we're looking for this product that these commissions represent. They'll put out a trade lead, and then they will try to assist them. The market access program, these other programs that we've been mentioning are all educational programs to help folks learn how to export if they are a new farmer.
Thank you. It doesn't sound like we've really got that direct line, though, where we're really doing anything specifically. And I bring this up because, once again, Texas is kind of a leading area for farmers of everything. We do everything in Texas, and we do it bigger. But nevertheless, you know, I was encouraged to hear from so many folk that have been doing this kind of as a generational kind of family thing. But then there are new people, and we are trying to encourage them. But I do want to make sure that they understand as quickly as possible that they do have access to these programs. And so I would hope that we could assist you better, just making sure that those people that we are really, the people that want to become farmers, have what they need up front to make sure that they are going to be successful. And honestly, specifically in Texas, we definitely need to make sure that they've got access to being able to export. So with that, we grow lots of things, but I'm gonna talk about corn for a second. And so we just heard from the chairman about basically the issue as it relates to Mexico, right? And so I'm wanting to know from y'all what steps or what can we do to help out as it relates to making sure that producers, farmers, all people that would be affected by the negotiations are in the loop with what's going on, because these are people that need to make sure that they are making their planting decisions in a timely manner. And so a lot of them are communicating that they just kind of feel like they're out of the loop and just waiting on someone to tell them something.
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. At CHS, we provide a lot of services directly to farmers. I'll give you an example of our CHS hedging business, where we do farm consulting services to advise farmers on not only the current state of markets, but also in risk management strategies and how they participate in these markets in the most efficient and effective way to manage risk on the farm. It's particularly helpful educational services for new farmers. And through those type of communications and connections that we have directly to farmers, I think they are able to get the kind of information that they need to make the decisions that you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here and sharing your perspective about the agricultural industry, which I think is extremely important. But you know, I have always maintained the idea that the demand for U.S. commodities and products are really because our farmers and ranchers are able to produce such quality products. And so, and we have the ability to logistically deliver that to anywhere in the world, including protein. And as Ambassador Dowd mentioned, the greatest opportunity ahead may be in the ability to grow and export protein, all types of protein, meat, dairy, plant-based, and get it around the world. So with that preface, I want to start my questioning with Mr. Dowd, Ambassador Dowd. You helped negotiate the Phase 1 agreement of China, which expired at the end of 2021. China is an important market for U.S. agriculture and is the #1 export market for U.S. soybeans. In marketing year 2021, China imported 31.7 million metric tons of soybeans. In comparison, Mexico and the European Union are U.S. soy's next two largest trading partners, and for that same marketing year, Mexico imported 4.9 and the EU 4.2. So diversification of the market, and many of you made reference to that, has been occurring, but the sheer scale of the Chinese market is hard to replicate. So my question is this. Given the importance of the Chinese market to the U.S. soy and other agricultural commodities, and recognize the variety of issues facing the U.S. government when dealing with Beijing, how would you advise this administration and this committee to engage in the dialogue with China?
Congressman, it's a great question, and there are several facets to this. Context. China imported $235 billion worth of food from the world last year. That compares to total U.S. ag exports to the world of $196 billion. These are the two biggest food traders on planet Earth. We've got to have a dialogue. In the year 2019, I spent 33 negotiating sessions, hundreds of hours, a year of my life, negotiating some 57 structural changes and provisions with China in agriculture. Today, about 54 or 5 of those are fixed, complete, and that's allowed us to take U.S. ag exports from, what was it, $26 billion to $38 billion. It wasn't the 40 that we had in the agreement, and it wasn't too bad at the end of the day, and we're still making progress. By the way, while we were doing that, African swine fever hit in China. They lost 40% of their hogs. What we didn't anticipate because of that is now China is the world's largest corn importing nation by a country mile, providing a huge opportunity, to your point, in this relationship between protein and corn and soybeans. So my point is the final point is this: we have got to continue to have a dialogue between the Chinese people and China and the U.S. when it comes to food and agriculture. It's absolutely paramount.
It's extremely important. I mean, it's very hard to replicate the number of people in China, and we need to consume all the products we grow every year, and that takes a lot of mouths. So I appreciate your perspective on that. I'm going to turn to all the witnesses with this question, and we've got about 1 minute 6 or so. So we've made reference to the Farm Bill, 2023 Farm Bill. So what improvements can be made in Title III, the trade title, to best support our U.S. farmers and ranchers in the global marketplace? And I want to give all of you an opportunity to respond to that. But we only got 45 seconds, too. So.
I'll go quickly. With a return of 25 to 1, how many dollars do you want to put into that program? How much do you want to invest in it? FMD and MAP.
Good point.
MAP.
Comprehensive trade agreements. We sell more pork to the 20 countries that we have those agreements with than all the rest of them combined.
As I said in my testimony, the MAP and FMB programs and increasing funding for programs like that.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I want to now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Jackson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much for the witnesses that have come before us today. And I am proud to say I come from the great state of Illinois. And of course, this question is about corn. So we are exporting roughly 60% of our annual crop is destined for overseas. There's a heightened tension now with China, of course. And I'd like to know, in your opinion, this was probably first directed to Mr. Griffith, where should the U.S. look outside of China to open new markets if we have continuing tensions and potential trade restrictions with China?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I'll highlight back to what Ambassador Dowd just said about the importance of China and some of the statistics that have been said in this conference around continuation and the importance of trade with China, as well as diversifying away from China. Key areas of the world that are the most typically talked about and focused on by policymakers and private sector participants like CHS would be Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Those are areas that we focus on every day. We're focused on diversifying where we take product And it is just difficult, given the numbers that have been stated about China, to make a significant move, but it's important that we're consistent and diligent in that pursuit.
Okay, and to the Honorable Mr. Dowd, of course, Illinois, once again, is a grain exporting state. As you're well aware, the USDA MAP and the FMD programs provide cost share funding so organizations can help maintain and develop foreign markets for our products around the world. How important are exports to the grain industry? And I'd like to know, are we keeping pace with our competitors in this area?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a great question. You know, my first job out of college was with U.S. Wheat Associates, that is the cooperator in wheat. Half of U.S. wheat is exported. Half of it goes off the Pacific Northwest and Portland. And the answer, are we keeping up? And the answer is no. We are not keeping up with our competitors in terms of trade agreements. And we are not keeping up in terms of our ability to promote our products using the FMD program, which, by the way, helps keep overseas offices open for all our cooperator programs, and the Market Access Program, which helps bring folks from overseas, our customers, to this country to see our regulatory system and how it works. You see, Congressman, in my experience, most other regulators around the world see our regulatory system as if it's their own. They think that we do things the same way they do. And so spending money to bring these folks over to our country to let them see how we do it is of enormous value in building the relationship, but also opening markets.
And would you say that our current program is underfunded?
I would say that it's got some work to do, Mr. Congressman.
Any proposals, solutions that you would recommend?
Well, again, if the return on that dollar that's joint funded by farmer checkoff dollars and taxpayer dollars, if every dollar you spend, you're getting 25 back in terms of exports, I think that's a pretty good place to spend some money.
Excellent. And one last comment I would just make, I think it's important for the Ag Committee to note, and industry in general, is that we talk about the African Trade Growth Initiative. This was the first time in American history that America had a trade policy, non-human, if you will, with Africa. We had not considered a trade program with the continent before. So as we look at this anew, I hope that we embrace trade agreements. I've long advocated that we go beyond looking at the G20 to even looking at the G21. There should be a representative from the continent of Africa, which in the next 20 years will have almost 15 to 20% of the world's population on the continent, so we can redirect our focus on expanding trade opportunities for our country. I yield my time back.
I now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing and for all of our witnesses for being here today. I represent the 1st District of Kansas and have long said that my top 3 priorities in this farm bill are crop insurance, trade, and oversight. Last year, as mentioned, the U.S. exported just under $200 billion of ag products. Kansas contributed about $6 billion to that. Our products that we export out of Kansas are beef and other proteins, wheat, sorghum, corn, goes to nearly 190 foreign markets around the world. Considering those numbers, I believe Congress must think critically and carefully about trade and trade promotion, especially as we authorize this farm bill. I'm proud, and this has come up a couple times, MAP and FMD. You know, that's why I co-led the Ag Export Promotion Act in this Congress. This legislation would allocate additional resources to MAP and FMD, which, you know, we got to remind everybody, we have not increased these numbers since 2002. So it's way over time, and given the return on investments that we're talking about, that we had more money there, and would like to get that incorporated into this farm bill. A handful of questions. First for you, Mr. Griffith. You mentioned in your testimony about Vietnam being a success story of increasing our trade relationship through these programs. Any other success stories come to mind that you can think of as we've benefited from these programs?
I don't know if I have another specific one, but I would just generally say, given the how dynamic the global market is and the needs to have access to markets to move from places of surplus to deficit and how that changes constantly, As I said, a diligent and continuous focus and funding in this area. We never know when we're going to have those success stories or where they're going to be, but we need to have frameworks in place and agreements in place that allow for that to happen in time of need.
Yep, great. Again, my takeaways from this hearing is just we've got to be focused on increasing MAP and FMD, given the return on investment, and if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. And we're leaving trade dollars on the table for our ag producers. Incredibly important. Next couple of questions are for you, Ambassador Dowd. Great being with you last week in our home state of Kansas. Great meeting your dad last week. Great seeing your son here today. My question for you, first one, we know that a lack of effective cold storage or the inability to distribute, on a country's receiving end as we export are major barriers to expanding and diversifying our export markets. Can you share your thoughts on the importance of building out cold chain capacity and help us identify any areas in the Farm Bill that we could help to potentially meet this need?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a great question. And the first point I think to make is where the U.S. really excels, where our advantage is in value-added agricultural exports. Pork, beef, poultry, dairy, that's a value-added export. But in order to do that, you've got to have cold chain technology. We've done well in exports to CAF, to DR, but we need help in terms of infrastructure to expand that. We talk about the Indo-Pacific Partnership, and it's tragic that we're not going to talk about tariffs and market access, but I think cold chain technology and infrastructure in the context of that would be a fantastic conversation. We've talked about Africa. Goodness knows we need to have more infrastructure and cold chain technology in that part of the world as well. So I think that is an enormously important question.
I appreciated your comments. And when we talk about value-added agriculture, we've got to remember when we export our proteins, our commodity producers benefit greatly from that. It trickles down. Let's add the value here, and then let's figure out ways to improve cold storage over there to help rise the water, so to speak, for all the boats on the pond. Second question for you, Ambassador Dowd, and this actually was a question the chairman had asked to Mr. Griffith, but it was on my list for you as well. So we'll let you answer the question, Ambassador. And this has to do with China or with India and the WTO. Subsidies and that issue with their wheat and rice farmers, where they're subsidizing them, which far exceeds the limits. But I've been working a lot with Representative Crawford. We've been leading efforts to urge USTR and the White House to engage in a formal dispute process to ensure that India is compliant with its WTO commitments. Ambassador, are you in favor of a formal dispute process? And if so, can you speak to its benefit? And if not, why not?
Yeah, Congressman, it's a great question. I think the answer is it's time. The first, when I was in the administration, my first trip to the WTO in Geneva, I was the guy that slid the first ever counter notifications across the table to my Indian counterpart there in Geneva about rice and wheat and their subsidies. There's a reason India is the largest rice exporter in the world. There's a reason they're now exporting wheat. It's their subsidies. And they are so far beyond what is their ability to do under their Uruguay Round Agreement. It's time to address it.
And I think far past time we stood up for our American ag producers in so doing. So I know I've gone past my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Hayes. Mr. Chairman, our panel of experts is here to talk about something very important, agriculture trade. But before I get to that, with this being our first meeting in the Subcommittee on Nutrition, Foreign Agriculture, and Horticulture, I would be remiss not to mention that we should be discussing how House Republicans continue to weaponize the debt ceiling by proposing food insecure Americans pay for their tax cuts. The Republican debt bill that passed by just one vote in the House increases the number of people whose benefits are susceptible to SNAP's punitive time limit by extending the limit to older adults ages 50 through 55. Now, this 5-year age bump may not seem like a lot, but according to the Center on Budget Policy and Priorities, it would put nearly 1 million SNAP recipients at risk of losing their benefits. It is unfathomable that I even have to say this, but taking food from people does not help them find work. It just makes them hungry. It has been a long-standing bipartisan practice that legislating SNAP and our nation's nutrition policy belongs in the Farm Bill and in this committee. To open the Farm Bill for reckless partisan politics is offensive to the contemplative work that we conduct in this committee. So, back to the subject at hand. As my colleagues have mentioned, food security is a matter of national security. American farmers play a pivotal role in exporting products around the world. Much of this work falls under the support of the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. So, Mr. Dowd, you've described in your testimony how various trade barriers have been resolved due to the work of government officials at the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. 2 questions. Can you give an example of one of those success stories? And, in your opinion, what could be done in the next Farm Bill to support the FAS?
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's, the first thing I have to say is the company that I work for today, these are military guys, West Point guys. It is actually the mantra of our company, food security is national security. So I appreciate you saying that. That's what we talk about every day and what I do now. In terms of examples, there are so many little things. When I went to Brazil, we got a tariff change with Brazil, and we'd been working on that one for 25 years. When geographic indicators and things we included in USMCA to kind of keep the Europeans from using that as a non-tariff trade barrier all around the world. There are all these little nuggets, whether it's, that you can utilize. You kind of caught me off guard here to think of 100 of them, but the folks that do this are the best. It was my honor of a lifetime to work with these folks in government. And regardless of politics and administration, in agriculture, you've got the best folks on earth working on this stuff.
Excellent. And so, again, in your opinion, what could be done in the next Farm Bill to support the FAS?
Well, I think, as we've described here, FMD and MAP task programs, I think are, that's where it's at, Congresswoman.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your story and your feedback. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
And I recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ohio ranks number 9 in the nation in number of farm operations, with international trade being critical. However, it is concerning that USDA's recent outlook for agricultural trade anticipates exports for all major commodity groups to be reduced, with the decreases projected for corn, soybeans, dairy, and livestock. Preserving and expanding international trade is paramount, as soybeans are the top agricultural export for Ohio and the United States, with more than half of our soybean crop exported overseas. Mexico is one of the largest destinations for United States corn exports, with $4.92 billion in trade. However, these commitments made under the USMCA must be upheld, including access for biotech corn, and I will be leading a letter with my colleagues to USTR in that regard. Ohio ranks 7th in the nation in pork production, and with 25% of pork goods exported, yet threats relating to foreign animal diseases are a constant concern. Finally, for dairy, enforcement of dairy market access obligations under the USMCA is absolutely vital. Ohio state economists have summed it up as agricultural functions in a global market with many factors influencing income and expenses. Ohio farmers must remain aware of global forces impacting markets. To any of the witnesses, given these trade challenges, how can we best advance science-based trade policies essential to food security and be vigilant in enforcement of trade commitments as to not cause economic harm to United States farmers? Any takers?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll take that. I absolutely agree. Science-based trade policy is crucial. I work with the fruit and vegetable industry, and we export our products all over the world and are continually challenged by sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Some of those are just straight up political measures. Some of them are different perspectives on science. Using the Codex system, the Codex committees, gathering support from our trading partners who are like-minded, all play a critical role in ensuring that sound science is used with U.S. agricultural exports. And then there are cases where it needs to just simply be challenged through trade agreements like USMCA or through the World Trade Organization. There are some times when we just cannot reach an agreement and you need to have a dispute settlement to try to figure things out. But I'm absolutely in agreement that science is important. We lead in science and agriculture, and we need to continue to support that in order to keep our exports moving. Thank you.
Thank you. This question will be for Mr. Griffith or Mr. Dowd. We must be vigilant to hold our trading partners accountable for obligations made under the USMCA. Mexico's position on biotech corn is creating uncertainty, and in your opinion, how can the United States trade officials most effectively take action with our Mexican counterparts to eliminate trade barriers that could negatively impact American corn producers?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman, for your question. I might comment from a NAGA perspective. We view the utilization of technology, such as biotechnology, to produce safe and abundant food supplies of grains and other agricultural goods is essential. We believe the best way to facilitate trade is with reliance on sound science underpinning all regulation. I think it's important for us as the U.S. to lead on science-based measures so other countries don't make the rules. NAGA does not object to the USTR dispute resolution case and hopes that the resolution can be found. But NAGA does not have any doubt that the U.S. would maintain a logistical advantage in the delivery of corn to Mexico, no matter the type of seed.
Yeah, and what Mexico is doing, it's more of a protectionist revision than it is in science-based evidence, and I know we've heard a lot of that today. And when we met with one of the USTR trade reps, in terms of, I asked a specific question. How are you going to hold these individuals accountable? What is your framework? What is your strategy? Even if you bring them to a panel, are they going to agree? And if they do agree, are you still going to hold them accountable? Because just a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, or whenever it was put in place, they made the agreement, and they've negated the agreement, both Mexico and Canada. So I have concerns with this administration actually pushing forward and holding these other countries accountable, even if it does go to a dispute panel. And that's where my concern lies. And I did not get an answer. I had no framework. All I was told is I cannot divulge the strategy. But I thank you very much for your time, all of the witnesses, and thank you for your answers. I yield back.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Takoda, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Tokuda, Mr. Chair. Thank you, no problem. Distinguished panel, thank you for your testimony today. I just returned from a week traveling throughout Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, 5 islands in 5 days, and met with agricultural ranchers, producers, farmers, and stakeholders throughout our state. Something that was raised multiple times was the dumping of foreign agricultural products like beef in our local markets at price points local producers have not been able to compete with. While we want to reduce the cost of food for our constituents, I have concerns that foreign imports that are well below what we're able to, produce it for locally could lead us to growing less of our own food, which at the end of the day could be a national security concern as well. Hawaii used to produce a good amount of the beef that we consume on island, and now it's far less than 10%. For the panel, what can we do in this Farm Bill to help encourage and help domestic producers compete with foreign imports and address the dumping of agriculture products in the United States? And I will add that we do know, as a result of diversification of U.S. consumption and demand for a variety of foods, literally since 1997 till 2022, we have seen the amount of imported agricultural goods quintupled in value, reaching, I believe, $198 billion in 2022 alone. So this is not just a Hawaii problem, it's a national problem. So your thoughts on this? Anyone?
The buck is getting passed to me a lot here today. Congresswoman, it's a really difficult question because we are in a situation right now with beef, because we've had droughts all over the U.S. Our beef prices are high. In Australia, they've had their share of drought, but because of La Nina, they've had a lot of rain, so now their production is coming back online. So this the situation with weather and the long-term cycles of beef are a huge problem. Your question is a good one, and the answer to that typically is to work with the International Trade Commission and USTR to look into remedies for those types of situations.
Thank you. And then I would argue, too, though, that it's not just beef, unfortunately. We're finding macadamia nuts, other specialty crops as well, finding significant import, into our markets now and impacting our local growers and farmers. So I think this is a vulnerability we face across commodities and specialty crops that we really need to take a good look at. I want to piggyback a little bit off my last question to discuss country of origin labeling, another issue that did come up as I made my way throughout our islands. While country of origin labeling requires retailers such as full-line grocery stores, supermarkets, club warehouse stores to notify their customers with information regarding the source of certain foods, the U.S. still trails Europe in terms of protecting the standards of identity of certain products and locations. Toblerone recently had to change its label because of Swiss law, and Miller High Life's model, the champagne of beers, as we know, led to a destroyed product. However, products taking advantage of the Hawaii brand are pervasive. Coffee that contains merely 10% of Kona coffee can be labeled Kona coffee. Many of the mac nuts that we enjoy today are actually from Africa, not actually from Hawaii. How do you feel about having stronger country of origin labeling in the United States? Anyone?
I think there are a variety of opinions among different industries on that. And so I'm not really qualified to speak on how the different industries feel on the position. There are industries that have very, such as the groups in Hawaii, who have very strong feelings. They grow. They want to make sure that their industry is known for that. And then there are other industries who want to be able to grow and sell their products using different. So I don't think there's a unified position on country of origin labeling, at least in our industry, in the horticultural industry.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
This is not an area that CHS is involved in and doesn't have a policy on country of origin labeling.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we'll go on, but I do believe that there are many specialty crops that are grown throughout our country in which they pride themselves on brand and in geography as well. And I think as much as other countries are protecting theirs, I think we need to do the same for ours here in the United States as well. Really quickly, we may not have time to go into this, but I wanted to touch upon agriculture technology. Because we predominantly grow specialty crops, smaller farms in Hawaii, ag tech, like large tractors, is not practical for majority of farmers in Hawaii. We have to have everything barged in, which is a high cost in terms of inputs for our farmers and growers. There's a lot of interest in importing ag tech from Japan and other countries in Asia. Our legislature recently approved funds to actually look towards this innovation. And we do know, though, that there are many issues regarding EPA emission standards compliance. And so I would hope, with the time I know is over now, that we would be able to discuss how perhaps the United States could assist in the importation of this ag technology for the benefit of our smaller to medium-sized farmers and growers here in the United States. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. De La Cruz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this committee and this hearing today. And thank you to our witnesses. Our relationship with Mexico is vital to our Texas farmers. I live in South Texas, and so this is a community that I'm especially close to. That being said, I know that Congressman Miller talked a little bit about the Mexico's banning of the imports on the genetically modified corn. And that is, of course, of great interest and of concern for our farmers. So I just wanted to put it on your radar that in February, along with some of our fellow Texans, wrote a letter commenting the USTR and USDA for their rejection of the Mexican government's proposal to ban U.S. imports of genetically modified corn for food production. And so the letter stressed the importance of the need to uphold the integrity of the USMCA and take forceful action. And so I just wanted to make sure that I'm on record stating that. Now, on a separate topic, as you probably all know, the Market Access Program and the Foreign Market Development Program have proven popular with agricultural industry and offer valuable support to the U.S. economy. An independent study recently found that for every dollar invested into these specific programs, a return of $24.50 is realized. So my question is, can you share with us how these programs have been utilized to build foreign markets for agriculture products, and do you have any suggestions for us to improve on these programs as we write the upcoming Farm Bill?
I think I'm the only one that hasn't answered that yet. Those are good programs, MEP and those. In fact, I was just in Mexico City earlier this week on a trade committee meeting and had lunch with a couple of individuals that work for a small company that does sausage products in Mexico. And those type of funds are being used in those situations. And they talked about the high quality pork that comes to them from the United States and how they really appreciate that. And they said, you know, if we have access to dollars or more dollars to promote pork, our products in Mexico here, that means we buy more pork from you. I think that's a success and a win for all of us.
Excellent. So would your suggestion be to increase funding then?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. More dollars, right? Now, Mr. Lance, as you know, the TASC program provides funding for projects that address these existing and potential sanitary and technical barriers that prohibit or threaten the export of our specialty crops. Can you just walk us through some of the benefits of this program? I know you've answered some questions like this previously, but I'd like for you just to go through it for us.
Yes, task is crucial. Without task, the trade barriers that unexpectedly come up in the specialty crop industry are very difficult to overcome. We have set budgets, and all of a sudden there is a unexpected challenge in a foreign market. Task is used immediately to try to address those challenges. Let me give you an example. I was recently in Bangkok. And I was approached by an apple farmer who said, how come I can't export to Thailand? I used to be able to export to Thailand. The West Coast still can, but the Pennsylvania, Michigan, New York cannot export. And so that industry has applied for a task grant to engage with the Thai government in order to reopen so we can reopen the market. Unexpected issue that came up, task will be used to reopen the market.
Thank you so much. And with that, I yield back.
And I want to recognize yet another member from Texas, Mr. Kesar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Proud to represent Texas today. I want to talk about Cuba, the embargo, farmers, food, and immigration. Cuba is facing its worst economic crisis in decades, resulting in dire shortages of essential goods like food, medicine, and sanitary products. These conditions have caused a record number of Cubans to flee out of dire necessity. The Cuban government bears responsibility, but we also know the crisis has been made worse by U.S. sanctions and the embargo against Cuba, which for 60 years has crippled trade and financial transactions between our two countries that are so close geographically. And in those 60 years, these sanctions and the embargo have not resulted in the sweeping shift towards democracy in Cuba that we would like to see. But current economic conditions have compelled folks to flee. And as we know, folks fearmonger about migrants at the border. We know that more often than not, migrants are seeking refuge out of necessity. And we should be revisiting our policies that push people out of their home countries when they want to stay at home. The embargo doesn't just come at a cost for everyday Cubans, the embargo also comes at a cost for Americans, because before the embargo, Cuba was the 9th largest export market for U.S. farm products. Today, it has fallen below 50th on that list. American farmers that I've spoken with want to export to Cuba, but can't because our policies, despite allowing food exports, deny credit in Cuba. That means U.S. producers can export agricultural commodities to Cuba, but they must do so on a cash for a crop basis. So Cubans are forced to buy ag products at a higher cost from countries across the ocean, like countries in the EU, that provide credit. Mr. Griffith, your organization, the North American Export Grain Association, is part of the United States Agricultural Coalition for Cuba. Can you talk about why your organization or others support opening up Cuba for more exports?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. Markets like Cuba that are 90 miles off the coast of Florida, near-in markets in general to U.S. agricultural producers are extremely interesting to our producers. With the rising cost of transportation, we're in favor of market access and free and fair trade to places like Cuba and other areas. So I think it comes into more of a broader policy topic.
Absolutely, thank you. Ambassador, any comments on what impact you think opening up Cuba might have for U.S. farmers and for exports?
Congressman, I think that the market is open, and I think that it's difficult, at least for me personally, in my own personal aspect, to justify loaning Cuba money.
If you think the market is open, then why is it that they are buying so much of their agricultural products from the European Union? Why have they gone from 9th to 50th on our market for food products and ag?
Well, I think it's largely a function of what we're talking about here in credit, but also the just complete failure of the Cuban economy.
At the end of the day, the Cuban economy and, as I mentioned, the Cuban government bears significant responsibility for what is happening there. We should be pushing and continue to push for democracy there and all over the world. But today, I think it's important for us to reflect on whether the past 60 years of policy are continuing to yield the level of benefit that we want for the American people. And it is way more expensive for us to deal with this here when it meets us at our border, rather than creating the opportunity for people to stay at home, to be able to live in the communities they want to live in. I don't think that it serves us to be starving people abroad. I think that it helps Americans for us to be feeding people all over the world. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
I now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before we get started, I just got to say that I take umbrage with a few comments that were made earlier today by one of my colleagues. I was raised in abject rural poverty by a single mother. I was on what were actually food stamps at the time, so GT doesn't get mad. I had subsidized school lunches. I ate government cheese. I'm a member of Congress because of some of these programs. And I would remind everyone that the state of Wisconsin just voted 80% for work requirements for these types of programs. I don't believe that the fear-mongering with those in most need by playing partisan politics with disingenuous talking points, I think that's neither productive or appropriate for this committee, and that should stop. Mr. Lance, I represent Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District, and as you know, Wisconsin is the #1 producer of cranberries in the world. We produce over half of the world's cranberries. And it's correct. That is a fact. What Wisconsin has is cranberries. Massachusetts has marketing, just to make that clear to my colleagues. I'm very concerned about the issue with the minimum residue levels, particularly with the European Union, and they appear to be using these to manipulate a market and starting to, or in the future, be excluding our products, particularly our cranberry growers, from being able to access that market. With that said, in your testimony, you said that the USTR, USDA, FAS, and our embassies around the world are working to ensure the U.S. agriculture is not hindered by these complex practices. Now, are you satisfied that the Biden administration is taking the appropriate efforts to make sure the European Union, and as referenced earlier, China and India, are not eating our proverbial lunch?
Thank you. Excellent question, and I love cranberries.
So, thank you. You're welcome anytime.
And I work with a lot of Wisconsin cranberry growers. I think the MRL situation is the driest, very difficult to understand, but one of the most crucial challenges facing all agriculture, not just for specialty crops, these differing standards. And I would advocate for the continued expanded engagement on this issue. And how that happens is through finding like-minded trading partners. I've talked to Ecuadorian banana growers. I've talked to South African citrus growers. Everyone has an issue with the European Union's policies.
Right.
And those need to be addressed in the World Trade Organization and watching Codex to make sure the Codex standards remain strong as well. So, yes, I agree.
Thank you, sir. And that leads to, Mr. Ambassador, what is your level of confidence in the World Trade Organization to be a neutral arbiter when dealing with China, India, and the European Union?
Well, the great challenge that we have at the WTO is you have to have consensus. And so any one of these countries can vote in the negative, and that blows the whole possibility of making any progress up.
Try being in Congress.
Sorry.
Okay.
So the answer is, to your point, there's large consensus on so many of these issues in terms of global trade and agriculture. So is there a better way to do this that we can make progress, even though you may have one country that doesn't want to do this for the betterment of the planet? And the challenge is that's the process that we have to figure out how to develop going forward. We can't let one country stand in the way of making progress when it comes to technology and agriculture.
Okay. And then I want to echo some of the comments of my colleague, Mr. Jackson from Illinois. You advise firms concerning the trends for 5, 15, and 20 years out. Are you advising them currently to be conducting contingency planning operations in case of a dramatically reduced or halted trade in the Indo-Pacific region due to increased tensions or a hot war with China?
No, not at the moment, sir. But I think what we do work with companies every day on are contingencies in supply chains in agriculture. I think that's a critically important conversation. We learned some valuable lessons in COVID, and I think those lessons can be applied across the board when it comes to this industry.
Mr. Ambassador, I would respectfully encourage you to start having those conversations.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. With that, I yield back.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Caraveo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Finstad, and to Ranking Member Hayes also for hosting this hearing this morning, and thank you to our panel for being here to provide your testimony. Growers in Colorado sell nearly 1.5 billion pounds of fresh potatoes annually, 90% of which goes to the fresh market. At the moment, though, Japan, who we are already shipping chip potatoes to, presents the opportunity of becoming a massive market for U.S. fresh potato exports. Opening this market would allow potentially a 10 to 15% increase in U.S. fresh potato exports. However, negotiations with Japan and the USDA seem to have been delayed indefinitely. So for Mr. Lance, can you speak to how we might be able to work with Japan to open fresh potato markets for our domestic potato growers and how this market opportunity might benefit them?
I spent a lot of time on this issue. I took Japanese officials to a potato farm in August. It's time. This is one of the potato industry's highest priorities. We are seeking to open this market so our potatoes can end up in grocery stores throughout Japan. We ship our potatoes throughout Asia, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia. It's time to open the Japanese market. If we open that market, we expect $150 million in sales, similar to what we're expecting in Mexico, and it would help change the face of the U.S. potato industry. Colorado currently has access to shipping potatoes, but all of the U.S. needs access for table stock potatoes. I know that there will be negotiations on this coming up in the fall, and I know that Secretary Vilsack recently raised this issue when he was in Japan. So we're pleased to see that this issue is is getting the traction it needs.
Well, I thank you for your work on it, and Secretary Vilsack as well for pushing these negotiations. I know most people may not realize that Colorado is such a big potato-producing state, but we certainly are, and so I thank you for that. To pivot, traveling through my district, I've had great opportunities to see the latest innovations of our agricultural producers that they're bringing to their farms, from hearing about automated dairy installations and watching laser weeders in action. So for Ambassador Dowd, how can we work with other countries in developing and testing innovations in agricultural technologies?
It's a great question. And I think the best thing we can do is bring overseas regulators, these regulatory agencies from other countries, to the United States to meet with our regulatory agencies, and furthermore, get out in the country and see how we do it. And that's what we're talking about with the market access program in particular. Seeing is believing. Congresswoman, I personally took the trade minister of Indonesia out to your part of the world when I was chief ag negotiator, and we had a conversation about apples. He was so impressed with our discussions that a few weeks later, he came back with his entire regulatory team, and he took them on the tour to show them, look, this is how the U.S. does this. This is not how it's done in other parts of the world, and we should let U.S. apples into Indonesia, and it worked. This, seeing is believing sometimes in these discussions, and that's how we get that done, is through the MAP program.
I certainly agree that more people need to be seeing these producers in action, and so I thank you very much for that. And with that, I yield back.
All right, I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Finstead and Ranking Member Hayes, for holding the hearing today, and thanks to our witnesses for bearing with us. Looks like I might be it unless somebody comes in. Okay. After limited access to Canada's dairy market was granted to U.S. producers via USMCA, accusations were levied by the U.S. that Canada has allocated their tariff quotas overwhelmingly to the dairy processing sector, effectively shutting out access to their market. Ambassador Dowd, I know you are familiar with this problem. Given USTR's announcement of a second USMCA dispute panel, are you confident that this matter can finally be resolved?
Congressman, this is without a doubt one of the most frustrating issues. We talked about potatoes in Japan. We had potatoes in Mexico. This is another one of those that is really, really difficult. I want to address this notion that sometimes you don't hear much from USTR when it comes to enforcement because you're in the middle of a legal proceeding and not much can be said. I want to encourage all of you to keep pressure on when it comes to these issues, whether it comes to Mexico and GMOs, whether it comes to Canada and dairy. That is helpful. And these enforcement mechanisms are critical. It takes time to work through. Sometimes you lose patience, I get it. But we've got to see this through and just keep everybody's feet to the fire here.
Are there alternative pathways that we should be looking at to rectify this issue?
Well, I hope this works. So this is the first test case of the new enforcement mechanism in USMCA. As I said earlier, an enormous amount of time was worked on by the lawyers to try to figure out how to do this the best way we can. And so let's hope this works and we're able to figure this out. But this is a tough one with Canada and dairy. They've always been impossible to deal with.
Thank you. Mrs. Stevemer, in your written testimony, you noted a dramatic drop in U.S. pork exports due to Taiwan's 2021 food safety labeling that you stated, quote, targets the United States, unquote. Your testimony also notes that the National Pork Producers Council is urging U.S. negotiators to use the existing U.S.-Taiwan Trade and Investment Framework Agreement as a mechanism to resolve these market access issues. I am a huge supporter of Taiwan and proud member of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, and as a supporter of Taiwan and of American pork producers, I would love to see us resolve this issue. Is there anything Congress can do to help push the Office of USTR to prioritize resolving this issue?
Well, I appreciate that question, and I would say that the comprehensive trade agreements, as we've discussed earlier, are those vehicles that allow us to have those type of conversations if there's a dispute about tariffs or non-tariff factors. So just keep having the conversation and keep working to get those comprehensive trade agreements in place.
Thank you. Ambassador Dowd, I would like to ask you basically the same question, given your experience as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator at USTR. Do you have any thoughts on how the USTR can help us resolve this issue?
Congressman, I first discussed this with Taiwan when I was a staffer on the Senate Ag Committee circa 2011, when I took a trip to Taiwan as a member of a staff delegation. So this issue has been a tough one for a very long time, like many of these other issues in agriculture. This is highly political in Taiwan. This is going to take an enormous amount of effort, both on the part of any administration and USTR and USDA, but also politically as well, in my humble opinion.
Thank you. Ambassador Dowd, as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator during USMCA negotiations, you worked to develop a side letter with Mexico on common cheese names. These challenges on American producers' ability to use common food and beverage names touch multiple markets around the world. While the letter in the USMCA set an important precedent for the protection of common terms, do you think the language should be expanded to include many other common names?
Yes.
Should the language have stronger and more proactive measures to counter the European Union's abuse of geographical indications?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Griffith, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of inland waterways as a vital part of CHS's supply chain. Tennessee's inland waterways are also a vital part of my state's transportation network. However, in my opinion, updating inland waterway infrastructure is often a challenging task, especially when inland waterway projects are competing for funds against other transportation-related infrastructure projects. In your testimony, you noted that most U.S. locks and dams have surpassed their expected 50-year design life, increasing delays and unscheduled outages that threaten to erode America's competitive infrastructure advantage. If you could, for the record, expand on just how damaging these delays and unscheduled outages are on our ability to export agricultural goods. My time has expired, so I'll have to yield back. Please respond for the record, if you might. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
You can submit that to the record, yes. All right, so now, last but not least, I recognize the member from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also to Ranking Member Hayes. And I do have some questions, and I thank all of the folks who are here to testify. But before I get to my questions, I just want to reiterate what Ranking Member Hayes had to say in her comments, as well as Congresswoman Brown, about hunger, about nutrition. You know, that's the first word in this committee, if you look at it, if you look at the title. But it's certainly a personal issue of mine, as I have 4 H's that I work on: hunger, housing, higher education, and health. And I appreciate this hearing on trade. I know I'm going to learn something. It is well within our jurisdiction, but we haven't had a subcommittee or full committee hearing on nutrition, and I certainly hope that we're able to do that, because the absence is conspicuous to me, especially as today, the end of the public health emergency means that so many people face a hunger cliff, and they're going to be kicked off life-saving pandemic-era benefits that we need to continue to work on. So let me just raise a couple of questions, and Mr. Lance, let me go to you first. Thank you for your testimony. The issues that you raised about maximum residue limits are well taken, and the confusion and the uncertainty they create are understandably frustrating, particularly when they result in a rejection. Are there opportunities at the farm level for reducing residue levels for U.S. crops for export, in addition to the important work that USTR, FAS, and our embassies do?
Yes, it's become every grower's responsibility to know where their product could potentially head and to know what those MRLs are. The way they do that is they use the MRL database, the Food Chain ID MRL database, and if they are in the United States, the USDA and EPA combine to fund access to that. So many of the grower groups we work with request that information, and we will provide what the U.S. standard is, what the foreign standard is, and they can make crop protection decisions based on that. Where they grow frustrated is when something is approved for use, they have a pest they need to control, and they find they can't use it because a foreign government has set a level, more restrictive level, and then they're told they can't use it because there's a risk of a rejection for it.
Okay, thank you. So let me move quickly. All of you have at least mentioned, and some have highlighted the importance of the USDA's market access program to developing markets in other countries. Every farm bill, some stakeholders argue that this program puts public dollars toward marketing activities that firms like yours would otherwise fund themselves. So could you, let me ask Mr. Griffith first, share what your industry does with MAP that it could not do without the program?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. I can only speak to NAGA's use of MAP funding. The focus of NAGA's work and with MAP funds is market access, trade facilitation, and stakeholder best practices for educations on grains, oilseeds, and their primary products. A key part of that effort is science-based regulation and technical education that levels the playing field for U.S. exports. And increasing funding would allow NAGA to expand educational programming and meet directly with stakeholders in markets that have just begun opening to U.S.
Okay, so let me ask, is there another person here who'd like to at least address that?
I can talk about a couple of the fruit and vegetable groups that use this. I was in New Delhi a month ago, and I was speaking with the U.S. Embassy, and they said it's incredible what the U.S. cranberry industry has done with MAP. Previously, cranberries were not exported to India. Dried fruits are incredibly important during holidays as gifts, and now they are exporting and selling those dried cranberries as part of holiday traditions in India. That would not happen without the MAP program.
Okay, great. Well, I had another question. I'm going to just send it in because I don't want to be rushed. But let me just thank you all for being here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the work that you do. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I too want to say thank you so much for all of you for your patience and willingness, and really just bringing your expertise to the table here. And it's so important that we operate with a strong amount of humility to understand that there's areas where we definitely don't know it all. So thank you for bringing that expertise. Before we adjourn today, I invite the ranking member to share any closing comments that she may have.
Thank you again to our witnesses for joining us here today. We appreciate your time and expertise and your willingness to share with this Congress. As we move into Farm Bill negotiations, it's vital that we remember how important trade is for our producers. The Title III programs are foundational to ensuring and improving access to foreign markets, and our producers need these markets to be accessible for our country. Maintaining good relationships with our trade partners brings stability to farms, grocers, restaurants, food banks, and consumers. Your insight on agricultural development, trade promotion, and foreign competition will inform us as we continue to draft the Farm Bill. Your perspectives are crucial to feeding communities locally, nationally, and across the globe. I also have to add that I am thrilled to have heard for the first time in this committee that we have a nutrition hearing planned, and I look forward to it because this is an issue that we must prioritize on this committee that has jurisdiction over it. So looking forward to that, very excited to work with the chair on that issue. And with that, thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Hayes. I would just close with a couple comments here. Again, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the work that you do to, really support farmers like me. When we talk about trade, I think what gets missed so often is that it takes a lot of hard work to build those relationships, and we need all the tools available to make sure that happens. And so for us, for me as a farmer, I can't do it alone, right? I can't just hop on a plane, go to Taiwan and say, hey, buy my corn, buy my soybeans. I'll bring it over in a couple small little containers. But we need folks like you that are at the table that can use those tools, that can help us create those relationships, to bring folks to see our apple orchards in Colorado, and to, really open up the door and the window to the world of what we do, and we do so well here in this country. So I will just say a couple points that I took out of today that I think are really important for us to continue to beat the drum on, and that is, we need free trade, but we need fair trade. And we need to make sure that we have the fair trade and the tools at our disposal that really allows us to play on a global playing field. And so, I just really would recommend that the administration and anybody that cares about agriculture in this country pays attention to that and make sure that we are at the table on those discussions. I will also say, I appreciate your comments, Ranking Member Hayes, in regards to, the full committee and the work that we look at doing in the first week or the first work period in June to have a conversation about the nutrition and SNAP program and moreover just the overall building of a good farm bill that we can be proud of. So with that, under the rules of the committee, the records of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. And with that, this hearing of the Subcommittee on Nutrition, Foreign Agriculture, and Horticulture is now adjourned.